Darren clenched his jaw, pouring the last of his energy into his summon in a desperate bid to break free. But Freya's mastery over the world tree overwhelmed him, unyielding, absolute. The summoned beast let out one final defiant roar before collapsing beneath the crushing weight of her roots. Raising his hands in surrender, Darren gave a respectful nod. "This round's yours, Freya." Elder Valen stepped forward, his voice steady as ever. Next match, Silas Black versus Leona Artemis. Silas wasted no time, summoning a legion of skeletal warriors. Each carried jagged bone swords and crude shields, their hollow eyes fixed on their target. Standing behind them, Silas exuded a sinister aura, shadows twisting around him like smoke. Leona's world eye flared to life, her irises glowing gold. She moved with uncanny precision, every motion deliberate as if she already foresaw the skeleton's every strike. With a graceful sweep of her hand, a radiant blade formed in her grasp. She dashed forward, carving through the first wave of undead with surgical grace. Silas smirked. With a flick of his hand, a monstrous construct of bone and shadow erupted from the earth. It swung a massive club at Leona, its strikes fast and unpredictable. Guided by her world eye, Leona dodged with impossible timing, but the construct adjusted, its attacks becoming wilder. The battlefield descended into chaos. Silas summoned flanking skeletons, forcing Leona to divide her focus. Yet every attack missed its mark. Her strikes dismantled the constructs with unerring precision. But the tide shifted. Leona's movement slowed, her breath grew heavy. Silas pushed harder, unleashing a frenzy. Just when it seemed the pressure might overwhelm her, Leona let out a sharp cry, her world eye burning brighter than ever. She unleashed a whirlwind of strikes, shattering the construct in an explosion of bone. Silas, chest heaving, raised his hands. "All right. You've got me. Well fought." Leona gave a silent nod, her trembling hands betraying the effort it had taken. Zane Indra versus Titus Riverdale. Their match erupted with a thunderclap. Zane hurled a bolt of black lightning, the crackling energy slamming into the ground with explosive force. Titus countered, conjuring a towering wall of water that absorbed the impact in a flash of steam. Zane grinned. "Let's see how long that wall lasts." Titus responded by manipulating the moisture in the air, forming serpentine water tendrils that lashed out. Zane moved like lightning, dodging with ease and retaliating with arcing bolts that forced Titus to raise a swirling whirlpool shield. The arena became a storm of clashing elements. Lightning danced across the ground while waves surged and crashed. Zane laid down a web of electricity to trap Titus, but the water mage soared above it, riding a pillar of water. From the sky, he rained down blasts of pressurized water, narrowly missing his target. Back and forth they battled, neither giving an inch. Mist filled the arena as Titus created a dense fog to obscure Zane's vision. But Zane laughed, surging with energy and dispersing the vapor in a single flash. "Nice try, but not enough." Titus answered with a massive tidal wave. Zane barely raised a lightning shield in time to deflect the brunt of it. Both stood, breathing heavily, their energy waning. Elder Valen raised his hand. "This match is a draw." "Well done." The crowd roared its approval. Freya Enrose versus Silas Black. Freya entered the arena once more, calm and composed, her power flowing beneath the surface like deep waters. Opposite her, Silas stood cloaked in necrotic energy. With a whisper, Freya summoned thorned vines that exploded from the ground, snaking towards Silas. He countered with agile skeletal constructs, bones clattering as they clashed with the vines. But Freya's roots multiplied, sharpened, and impaled the undead with ruthless efficiency. Silas summoned a spectral beast with glowing eyes and snapping jaws. It lunged, only to be caught mid-air by a cage of roots and crushed with brutal finality. "She's in full control," an elder murmured. "A true heir to the world tree." Unfazed, Silas cast a wave of necrotic energy that blackened and withered her roots. The arena dimmed, but Freya smiled. She touched the earth, and a pulse of vibrant green light rippled outward, cleansing the corruption and renewing her vines. Soon, Silas was ensnared, forced to surrender. He bowed in respect as the roots released him. Darren Dagon versus Zane Indra. Two titans met next. Darren summoned a winged serpent, its vast shadow engulfing the battlefield. Zane responded instantly with bolts of black lightning that cracked across the serpent's scales. The beast shrieked, diving for Zane, who darted aside in a blur and fired a lightning blast directly at Darren. But the Overlord Adept raised his hand, and the serpent shielded him with its coiled body. "He's using the summon as cover," Elder Valen noted. "But Zane's speed may tip the balance." What followed was a fierce duel of agility and power. Zane zipped across the arena, targeting the serpent's weak points, while Darren guided its strikes with steady focus. With a roar, Zane unleashed his full strength. A colossal bolt of lightning exploded from his body, striking the serpent and bringing it crashing down. Darren raised his hand in surrender. Titus Riverdale versus Leona Artemis. Titus and Leona faced off, the calm flow of water meeting the razor-sharp precision of light. Titus summoned a swirling whirlpool around him. Leona activated her world eye, piercing the watery veil with golden clarity. Her radiant blade shot forward, slicing through the defense and pushing Titus back. He retaliated with a surging wave. Leona leapt high, guided by foresight, and countered with a blinding beam of light that pierced the crashing tide. Titus constructed serpents, spears and barriers from water, but Leona's strikes dismantled them all with unerring precision. Eventually, drained of moisture and strength, Titus lowered his hands in surrender and bowed. Leona returned the gesture, both acknowledging the skill of the other. Observation deck. On the high platform, the elders watched with growing intensity. Freya's control is unmatched, one elder said. Her connection to the world tree is stronger than any we've seen. Zane's raw power and speed are terrifying, added another. He'll be a problem for anyone. Elder Valen narrowed his gaze. And what of Asher Magnus? He endured longer than any of them, and showed a power beyond his supposed rank. The elders fell into a thoughtful silence, their interest in Asher growing by the moment. As the final matches ended, the academy moved into the next phase of its trials. The students, exhausted, battered and proud, braced themselves for whatever came next. The academy grounds buzzed with murmurs as the final matches came to a close. The air was charged, not just with lingering energy from the battles, but with tension, awe and a deep sense of finality. The last trial had tested more than strength, it had measured grit, resolve, and the will to rise. Now, only the strongest remained. At the center of the clearing, Elder Valen's voice rang out, slicing through the chatter like a blade. Silence. The students obeyed, their tired forms straightening instinctively. Valen's gaze swept over them, some wounded, others defiant, all of them hardened by the crucible of the trials. His eyes lingered on a few in particular, Asher Magnus, standing apart with quiet focus. Freya Enrose, composed and unreadable. Darren Dagon, who met the elder's gaze with unflinching pride. You have passed, Valen said, his voice steady. But you are not alone. Across 3 other locations, trials have taken place under the guidance of my fellow elders. From these 4 regions, 160 students have emerged victorious. All of you are now part of this academy. The announcement stirred the crowd. Curious glances were exchanged. Whispers followed. How strong are the others? What did they face? Valen raised a hand, and silence returned. But this victory is only a beginning, he continued. Within this academy, you will be divided into 4 classes, each consisting of 40 students. At the summit stands the S class, the elite. Then A, B, and finally C class. A ripple of tension moved through the students. Asher remained still, though he could feel the weight of eyes flicking his way. Some with admiration. Others with resentment. Darren leaned toward Freya with a crooked smirk. S-class is mine. No debate. Freya glanced at him. Confidence is admirable, she said calmly. But arrogance is loudest before the fall. Valen's voice carried once more. Your class placements will reflect more than your trial performance. We assess your potential, your adaptability, and your ability to grow. Do not assume these ranks are final. In this academy, those who climb may fall. And those who fall may yet rise. Murmurs broke out again, some driven by ambition, others by unease. With a gesture, Valen summoned one of his aides, who approached with a sealed scroll. Your names will be revealed shortly, Valen said. Until then, you are dismissed to the common grounds. Reflect. Recover. Prepare. You've survived the trials, now comes the true test. As the students dispersed, some jubilant, others brooding, the real game had only just begun. At the common grounds. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the expansive field where students mingled. Some rested in quiet clusters, tending to wounds or sharing tactics. Others resumed training, unwilling to waste even a moment of potential progress. A few kept to themselves, watching, waiting. Freya sat beneath a vibrant tree, her presence subtly resonating with its life energy. She watched Darren with faint amusement as he summoned a towering beast, its claws digging into the dirt with each step. Look at this. Darren roared. Tell me this isn't S-class material. None of you could last a second against it. Freya sighed, brushing a leaf from her sleeve.
He's strong, she murmured.
But a beast is only as good as the mind that controls it. Elsewhere, Zain Indra leaned against a stone pillar, lightning still faintly crackling along his arms. He observed in silence until Titus Riverdale approached, conjuring a floating sphere of water. Darren's got muscle, Zain admitted. But power alone won't carry him through the academy.
Titus nodded.
Especially when a single surge can short-circuit that muscle. Across the grounds, Asher rested alone near a stone wall, eyes closed, his breathing steady. The noise around him faded as he focused inward, on his goals, on his path. But solitude rarely lasted long.
Magnus, a voice called.
He opened one eye to see Leona Artemis approaching, her posture confident, gaze sharp. Behind her, Silas Black drifted like a shadow. What is it?
Asher asked, tone flat.
Leona crossed her arms. That golem you defeated. That wasn't luck. Asher smiled faintly.
No. It was skill. And pain.
Silas chuckled behind her.
Be careful, Leona.
He might start growing on you.
She ignored him.
We'll see if you hold up when the real fights begin. Asher met her gaze. Is that a challenge? Not yet, she said, turning away. But maybe soon. As she walked off, Silas offered a small wave. Nice meeting you, Magnus. Try not to die early. Asher leaned back against the wall, watching the horizon. Whoever you are. He thought, my goal is still the same, to become the strongest in the world.
The announcement.
The sky dimmed as the sun dipped below the treetops, painting the common grounds in hues of orange and gold. The hum of conversation halted as Elder Valen returned, standing atop a raised platform with the sealed scroll in hand. Students, he called, his voice magically amplified. The evaluations are complete.
Every head turned.
The air grew still. You have faced trials of strength, intellect, and will. But now, your journey within the academy begins. Your placement will not define your future, only your decisions will. From behind him, the assistant broke the scroll's glowing seal and slowly unraveled it. Arcane script shimmered as names began to reveal themselves. Valen stepped aside.
Pay attention, he commanded.
Your class will determine the battles you face, the mentors you train under, and the pressure you will endure.
The assistant stepped forward. S-class, they declared. A hush fell over the grounds.
Asher Magnus. There was no surprise, only quiet acknowledgement.
A few nods. Some clenched jaws.
Asher stepped forward, face calm, eyes steady.
Zain Indra.
The lightning user gave a smirk and tilted his head in mock salute. Freya Enrose. Graceful and poised, Freya rose and walked forward, her expression unreadable.
Darren Dagon.
Cheers and groans mingled in the crowd. Darren looked smug.
Told you, he whispered.
Leona Artemis. Leona stepped forward, chin high, eyes like razors.
Silas Black.
A ripple of discomfort passed through the students. Silas simply grinned and followed the others. One by one, the remaining names were called, each drawing reactions, relief, disappointment, silent resolve. But the names of the S-class remained the ones etched into the minds of all watching. At that moment, it was clear, the Academy's strongest had been chosen. And the true battle had only just begun.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
As the last name was called, Valen returned to the forefront, his expression unreadable. Congratulations to those who have been placed in S-class, he said, his voice sharp. You are expected to lead by example, to rise to the challenges placed before you, and to surpass them. But let me remind you, complacency has no place here. Even the best can fall. His gaze swept over the rest of the students. To those in A, B, and C classes, do not let this placement define you. The Academy values growth above all else. Prove yourselves, and you may yet rise to stand among the elite. The students stood in silence as the weight of his words settled over them. Some clenched their fists, determination burning in their eyes. Others looked away, already planning their paths forward.
Now disperse.
Familiarize yourselves with the Academy. Your true journey begins tomorrow, Elder Valen declared, his voice cutting through the tension. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. A guide will now accompany each class and give you a tour of the Academy. Each class has its own dedicated guide to ensure you understand your unique privileges, responsibilities, and opportunities. With that, Valen stepped back, his imposing figure silhouetted by the grand banners of the Academy. The students began to break apart, murmurs filling the air as they processed the events. Many carried the weight of their new designations, their minds already calculating how they would navigate this next phase of their lives. Some were filled with pride, others with quiet determination, and a few with simmering resentment.
The S-Class Guide.
Asher stood among the other S-Class students, his crimson eyes sweeping the crowd as a tall, poised woman approached. Her striking uniform bore golden accents, signaling her authority and high rank within the academy staff. She introduced herself in a calm yet commanding voice. "I am Instructor Celeste, your guide. Congratulations on earning your place in the S-Class. You represent the elite of the academy, and as such, you will be held to the highest standards." Her piercing gaze scanned the group.
"Follow me.
I will show you what your rank entails." Celeste led them through the grand corridors of the academy, each hallway more ornate than the last. The S-Class facilities were nothing short of awe-inspiring. "This wing is exclusive to the S-Class," Celeste explained, gesturing to towering doors engraved with intricate patterns of gold and silver. "Your dormitories, training grounds, and study halls are equipped with the most advanced resources the academy has to offer." As they passed through, Asher noticed the envious stares from students in lower-ranked classes who happened to glimpse the tour. Darren Dagon smirked, clearly reveling in their reactions, while Freya Enrose remained as composed as ever, her expression unreadable. Celeste led the S-Class students deeper into the exclusive wing, a section of the academy that radiated prestige. The walls were lined with intricate carvings and glowing runes, each detail a testament to the status of the elite. "Your dormitories," Celeste began, gesturing to a row of ornate doors, "are designed for comfort and focus. Each suite is private, equipped with enchanted furnishings that adjust to your preferences. You'll also find a personal study area, alchemy station, and access to a dedicated library." The training grounds were next. A sprawling expanse filled with shimmering barriers and advanced training modules lay before them. "This arena is attuned to your abilities," she explained. "It can simulate various environments and opponents. It will push you to your limits, and beyond." They moved on to the study halls, a grand chamber with floating bookshelves and interactive magical charts. These halls hold knowledge not available to the other classes. You have access to restricted archives and guidance from the most esteemed instructors. Finally, Celeste stopped before a glowing sigil on the floor. "This teleportation circle is exclusive to the S-Class. It grants immediate access to the central tower, where you'll find the Elder Council and additional resources for special missions." The students absorb her words in silence, the weight of their privileges, and the responsibilities tied to them, settling in. For Asher, it was a reminder of how high the stakes had risen. The A-Class students gathered in a large atrium, its design practical yet elegant, a reflection of their status within the academy. Their guide, a stern-looking man in a deep blue uniform, surveyed them with a critical eye before speaking. "I am Instructor Kane," he began, his voice firm and direct. "Welcome to the A-Class. You are here because you have shown remarkable potential, but potential alone will not carry you to greatness. While the S-Class enjoys their prestige, you will earn your place through grit and determination. Remember, many of you could surpass them, if you are willing to put in the effort." Kane led them through the A-Class wing, starting with their dormitories. The rooms were clean and functional, lacking the luxury of the S-Class but still far superior to the accommodations of the lower ranks. Each dorm housed 2 students, encouraging camaraderie and collaboration. "Your rooms are equipped with the essentials," Kane explained, "as well as additional storage and a shared workspace for projects or studying." The training grounds were next, a vast outdoor space surrounded by enchanted barriers. Equipment for physical conditioning, magical development, and tactical drills lined the area. "These facilities are designed to push your limits," Kane said. "While the S-Class has the advantage of customization, you have the advantage of resourcefulness. Use every tool available to you." The tour continued to the study halls, where enchanted boards and group workstations created an atmosphere of focused learning. "Collaboration will be your strength here," Kane instructed. A-Class students often find their greatest power in their ability to strategize and support one another. Do not underestimate the importance of teamwork. Finally, Kane brought them to a central courtyard, where a large glowing obelisk hummed with energy. "This obelisk will grant you access to mid-level missions," he explained. "Unlike the S-Class, you will not receive direct summons to the Elder Council. But if you prove yourselves, opportunities will come your way." As Kane concluded the tour, his gaze swept over the students one last time. "You are the foundation of this academy," he said. "Remember that. Rise to the challenge, and you may find yourselves climbing higher than anyone expects." The students exchanged determined glances, inspired by the prospect of earning their way to the top. The tour of the academy was concise yet comprehensive, as the guide efficiently explained the key locations and their purposes. The students followed closely, taking in every detail of their new environment. This, the guide began, gesturing toward a grand archway, is the main hall. It serves as the central hub for announcements, events, and gatherings. You will report here for ceremonies or when summoned by the elders. They moved on to a towering structure, its spire piercing the sky. The Library of Eternity, the guide announced, his tone reverent. Here, you'll find ancient texts, spell tomes, and countless resources to aid in your studies. Access to certain sections will depend on your rank and accomplishments. Next, they visited the combat arena, an open-air coliseum encased in shimmering magical barriers. This is where most of your practical training and duels will take place, the guide explained. It is designed to withstand even the most destructive abilities, so do not hold back. The medical wing came next, a serene and pristine area staffed by healers and equipped with advanced alchemical equipment. Injuries are inevitable in this academy, the guide stated matter-of-factly. This is where you will recover. Our healers are among the best, but do not make carelessness a habit. Finally, the group arrived at the mission hall, where a large enchanted board displayed ever-changing listings. Your assignments, from reconnaissance to combat missions, will be issued here, the guide said. The higher your class, the more dangerous and rewarding the missions you will receive. As the tour concluded, the guide turned to face the group. The academy is vast, but you will become familiar with it in time. Each of these locations will play a role in shaping your journey. Remember, every resource here is a tool, use them wisely. With that, the students were left to explore on their own, their minds buzzing with the possibilities and challenges that lay ahead. As the tour concluded, the students were escorted to their respective dormitories, a crucial step in settling into academy life. The dormitory assignments were revealed in a formal announcement, delivered by a projection of Elder Valen in the central hall. For each class, dormitory arrangements have been meticulously organized, Valen's voice resonated. Your living quarters will not only serve as a place of rest but as an extension of your training, designed to enhance your focus, camaraderie, and resilience.
S-Class Dormitory.
The S-Class students were led to the northernmost wing of the academy, where an ornate gate opened to reveal a sprawling complex surrounded by enchanted gardens. The dormitory was nothing short of a palace, with towering marble columns, crystalline windows, and intricate carvings adorning the walls. Inside, the students marveled at the luxurious living quarters. Each room was equipped with a private bedroom featuring a 4-poster bed with enchantments to enhance rest and recovery, a personalized study area with shelves that magically stocked themselves with relevant texts, a training chamber with adjustable gravity settings and a virtual combat simulator. Freya Enrose touched a glowing rune on the wall, causing the room's lighting to shift to her preference. Darren Dagon smirked as he examined the summoning circle engraved into his chamber's floor, undoubtedly envisioning the creatures he would bring forth. Celeste addressed them one final time, her tone sharp yet encouraging. S-Class, your accommodations reflect your rank. But remember, this privilege is earned, not guaranteed. Stay vigilant and disciplined. The Academy rewards excellence, not arrogance. Her gaze swept over the gathered students, ensuring her words were taken seriously before continuing. At the end of each month, ranking challenges will be held. These challenges are designed to maintain competitiveness and give every student a chance to rise or fall. Celeste's voice carried a weight that emphasized the importance of the system. Here's how it works. Class advancement battles. The top 10 students of each lower class can challenge the lowest 10 students of the class above them for advancement. If a challenger wins, they take the loser's spot, and the loser drops to the top rank of their previous class. Intra-class rankings. Within each class, ranks 21 to 30 can challenge the next 10 ranks, 11 to 20, to climb higher. Those who reach ranks 6 to 10 can challenge the next 5 ranks above them. Top 5 battles. For the top 5 ranks, individual battles determine positions. Losing a match in this tier means dropping to rank 5, opening up the possibility of a challenge from rank 6. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she added, these battles are not just about physical strength. They test strategy, adaptability, and resolve. The ranking challenges are your chance to prove that you deserve to be here, or to reclaim what you've lost. The S-Class students exchanged glances, some smirking with confidence, others silently calculating strategies. Darren Dagon leaned against a wall, grinning. I like this. Keeps things interesting. Freya Enrose's calm voice countered his arrogance. It ensures no one rests on their laurels. Even the strongest can be dethroned if they're careless. Asher, meanwhile, stood silently, absorbing the information. His crimson eyes gleamed with determination, already envisioning the challenges ahead. Celeste concluded with a firm nod. Now prepare yourselves. Your journey in the S-class begins now, but maintaining your place here will be harder than earning it.
Dismissed.
The students began to disperse, some murmuring about strategies, alliances, and rivalries already brewing. Asher stayed behind for a moment, his thoughts consumed by the possibilities of the ranking challenges. He was ready to prove himself, but he also knew that in the academy, every victory would earn him points or academy currency.
A-class dormitory.
The A-class students were escorted to a sleek, modern building located near the central training grounds. While less opulent than the S-class wing, it was clear that no expense had been spared. The dormitory featured shared suites, each housing 4 students with individual rooms connected to a common area. A communal training hall with advanced equipment, albeit not as customizable as the S-class facilities. Study lounges with interactive maps and archives tailored to their level of access. Titus Riverdale ran his fingers over a glowing map in the lounge, intrigued by its depth. Not bad, he muttered, already planning his next strategy session. Zane Indra smirked. Bet you're still thinking of that tie, he teased, earning a sharp glare from Titus. The A-class guide reminded them, this dormitory is built for collaboration. Your growth will depend on how well you work with your peers. Embrace the challenge. B-class and C-class dormitories. The B-class and C-class dormitories were located in the southern and western wings, respectively. Though simpler in design, they were practical and comfortable, with basic amenities to support the students' progress. The B-class dormitory provided shared rooms for pairs, fostering teamwork. Their training facilities were functional but lacked the advanced features of the higher classes. The C-class dormitory, while the most modest, had a welcoming atmosphere. The focus here was on fostering determination and grit, with shared spaces to encourage community and growth. The S-class dormitories were unlike anything the students had expected. Each individual suite was spacious and elegant, designed for both comfort and practicality. Polished marble floors gleamed under soft ambient lighting, and large windows offered panoramic views of the academy grounds. Each room came equipped with advanced training equipment tailored to the occupants' abilities, a personal library, and a meditation area to refine focus and strategy. Asher entered his assigned room, his footsteps echoing slightly against the marble. He glanced around, noting the personalized setup. A faint hum emanated from the training device in the corner, a high-tech simulator designed to replicate real-world combat scenarios. A desk held neatly stacked books on magical theory, strategy, and combat arts. Asher ran his fingers along the edge of the desk, his thoughts drifting to the challenges ahead. Top 5, huh? He muttered under his breath, crimson eyes narrowing. Well, I will always remain on top. He glanced at his watch, bringing up the schedule for the week. His gaze lingered on the open days ahead, a small smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Classes don't start for another week, Asher mumbled. Seems like I can do whatever I want till then. His curiosity piqued, he opened another tab on his watch, a comprehensive list of the Academy's dungeons. His eyes widened slightly as he scrolled through the seemingly endless list. 10,000 dungeons?
Asher murmured in awe. Damn.
Even the Magnus family, with all their influence and resources, only owns a little over 1,000 dungeons. And we're supposed to be one of the most powerful families. The sheer scale of the Academy's resources was staggering. Each dungeon was categorized by difficulty, unique features, and the rewards they offered. Where did they even get all of this? Asher muttered to himself as he scrolled deeper into the list. The thought of exploring one of these dungeons sent a thrill through him. If he could conquer a few before classes began, it might give him an edge, not to mention some valuable loot and experience. He tapped on a particular dungeon labeled Ethereal Abyss, S rank. The description read, a volatile dungeon where gravity shifts, and enemies are attuned to spatial distortions. Rewards include rare mana crystals and spatial artifacts. Recommended for advanced adventurers or teams of elite students. Interesting, Asher said, his crimson eyes gleaming. But maybe not the best choice for now. Can't exactly risk dying before classes even start. He chuckled to himself before scrolling to another entry labeled Crimson Chasm, A rank. A dungeon teeming with blood element creatures. Perfect for those proficient in blood manipulation techniques. High-level blood affinity items can be found within. Now, this sounds perfect, Asher muttered, already imagining how he could use his blood ruler ability to dominate the dungeon. He clicked the Enter Request button, noting that approval would take a few hours. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Time to see just how strong I really am. A soft chime from his watch signaled that his request to enter the Crimson Chasm had been received and was pending approval. Asher glanced at the screen, a flicker of impatience crossing his features. "Let's hope they don't take too long," he muttered. He leaned back in his chair, but soon his eyelids grew heavier as I closed them. Asher closed his eyes as he thought of taking a nap for some time. After 6 hours, Asher wakes up to chimes of his watch. A notification flashed, "Request approved. Crimson Chasm reserved for Asher Magnus. Entry available in 3 hours." A smirk played on Asher's lips.
Perfect.
The time passed quickly as Asher prepared himself, going over his weapons, gear, and strategy. He didn't plan on relying solely on his blood ruler ability, though the nature of the dungeon meant it would undoubtedly give him an advantage. As the 3-hour mark approached, Asher made his way to the dungeon gates located within the S-Class training grounds. The entrance to the Crimson Chasm was unlike anything he'd seen before. A swirling vortex of dark red energy hovered between two massive stone pillars, faint whispers echoing as if the dungeon itself were alive. 2 other S-Class students lingered nearby, watching with curiosity. One of them, a tall boy with silver hair and golden eyes, smirked. "Heading into the Crimson Chasm alone?" he asked. "That's bold, even for you, Magnus. But I guess, this type of dungeons are nothing but playgrounds for you Magnus people." Asher didn't bother with much of a reply.
"It's not bold. It's necessary."
The boy laughed lightly.
"Fair enough. Good luck in there. You'll need it."
Without another word, Asher stepped toward the portal. The whispers grew louder as he reached out and touched the energy. A moment later, the world around him twisted, and he was pulled into the depths of the Crimson Chasm. This is an Gold Rank A category dungeon, which means, inside the maximum realm of monster will be Gold Rank while the number will be in 1000, so a category. Similarly for S rank it's 5000 monsters counts, and then for B rank it's 500, and then number kept getting lower for lower category dungeons. As Asher stepped inside, he found himself in a new world. The air inside was dense and heavy, saturated with the scent of iron. The environment glowed faintly red, the walls of the chasm pulsating like living flesh. Pools of viscous, blood-like liquid dotted the uneven ground, and faint growls echoed in the distance. Asher's crimson eyes gleamed as he activated his blood ruler ability, feeling the blood within the liquid around him resonate. He extended his hand, causing a tendril of the crimson liquid to rise and coil around his arm like a serpent. "Let's see how this dungeon tests me." The first wave of enemies emerged, a pack of crimson hounds with glowing eyes and jagged fangs. They charged with feral speed, their movements almost too fast to track. Asher's blade appeared in his hand, formed from his own blood. With a flick of his wrist, he lashed out, cutting through the first hound with ease. Another leaped toward him, only to be impaled by a blood spike that shot up from the ground beneath it. The fight intensified as more hounds poured out from the shadows. Asher moved with precision, his blood techniques weaving a deadly dance of offense and defense. He manipulated the pools of liquid around him, creating barriers, projectiles, and traps that shredded the creatures before they could get close. Each kill seemed to strengthen him, the ambient blood within the dungeon feeding into his ability. His blade grew darker, more potent, and his control over the environment sharpened. Asher's eyes grew in eerie red as he chuckled, finally. As the last of the crimson hounds fell, their blood seeping into the ground and merging with a pulsating chasm, Asher's laughter echoed through the air, though it wasn't quite him. His crimson eyes glowed brighter, taking on a dangerous, almost feral light. A sinister smirk tugged at his lips as he surveyed the carnage around him. The real Asher had retreated into the recesses of his mind, leaving his alternate persona, ruthless, unrestrained and hungering for destruction, in full control. Look at this, Alt Asher murmured, his voice dripping with dark amusement as he stepped over the lifeless bodies of the beasts. Such a lovely playground, soaked in blood and chaos. The perfect stage for me. He flicked his wrist, and the blood-soaked ground responded, writhing and shifting as if alive. Altasher's mastery over his blood-supreme ability was even more terrifying, his control sharper, more brutal. He twirled his blood-forged blade idly, his smile widening as the air grew heavier, saturated with bloodlust. Another growl echoed from deeper within the dungeon. The next wave was arriving, larger, more menacing creatures with blood-red armor and glowing eyes. These weren't mere beasts. They were knights forged from the same sanguine energy that fueled the dungeon itself. Finally, a challenge, Altasher whispered, his tone laced with mock excitement.
"Come on then.
Let's paint this lovely little chasm redder." The knight-like creatures charged, their massive blades slicing through the air with deadly precision.
Altasher didn't flinch.
Instead, he lunged forward, meeting the first knight head-on. Their blades clashed, sparks flying as Altashar's blood blade pulsed with dark energy. Not bad, he sneered, twisting his weapon and shattering the knight's blade with a burst of crimson energy. The knight staggered, but Altashar didn't give it a chance to recover. A spike of blood shot out from the ground, impaling the creature through its core. The other knights pressed forward, their movements eerily coordinated. Altashar reveled in the chaos, dancing through their attacks with deadly grace. Each slash of his blade was precise, each movement calculated to cause maximum carnage. Blood spilled and pooled around him, and he absorbed it greedily, using it to bolster his power. "You're nothing more than puppets," Altashar taunted, his voice echoing with malice. "And I am the puppet master." He raised his hand, and the blood-soaked ground erupted in a torrent of crimson spikes, tearing through the knights like paper. The air grew thick with a metallic scent of blood, and the dungeon seemed to respond to Altashar's power, the walls pulsing more violently. Altashar tilted his head, his smirk widening. "Oh? Are you enjoying this too, little dungeon? Shall we see how far we can push each other?" As the knights fell, their energy dispersed into the chasm, and a deep guttural roar reverberated through the air. The ground trembled, cracks forming as something massive stirred within the depths. Altashar's grin turned feral. "Ah, so the big boss finally wants to play. Let's see what you've got." He strode forward without hesitation, crimson energy swirling around him like a living aura. The dungeon itself seemed to pulse in anticipation, as if aware that it was facing something far more dangerous than it had ever encountered. Deep within his mind, the real Asher stirred faintly, a flicker of unease breaking through the darkness. "This isn't right," he thought weakly, but his voice was drowned out by the overwhelming presence of his alternate self. For now, the dungeon belonged to Altashar, and nothing would stop him from turning it into a blood-soaked masterpiece. The tremors intensified as Altashar approached the heart of the crimson chasm. The air grew thicker, oppressive, and alive with raw energy. The whispers that had been faint before now roared like a tempest, almost drowning out the sound of his boots crunching against the blood-soaked ground. Ahead, the pulsating walls of the dungeon peeled away to reveal a vast chamber, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. At its center, a massive creature began to emerge from a pool of swirling crimson liquid. The beast was unlike anything Altashar had faced before, an amalgamation of twisted limbs, jagged armor-like scales, and glowing blood-red veins. It stood over 20 feet tall, its 6 eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. A notification blinked on Altashar's watch, displaying the monster's name. Blood Titan, Sovereign of the Crimson Chasm, A-rank boss. The corners of Altashar's mouth curled upward into a sadistic grin.
A sovereign, huh?
And here I thought this place was running out of surprises. The Blood Titan roared, shaking the chamber and sending a shockwave of crimson energy rippling outward.
Altashar didn't flinch.
Instead, he raised his hand, the blood around him surging upward in response, forming a swirling barrier that absorbed the impact. "You're loud," he said mockingly, his crimson eyes locking onto the Titan. "Let's see if you can fight as well as you can scream." The Titan lunged, its massive fist crashing down with the force of an avalanche. Altashar leaped back, his movements unnaturally fluid, as if the blood-soaked ground itself was propelling him. He retaliated with a wave of razor-sharp blood blades, each one aimed at the Titan's exposed joints. The blade struck true, but the Titan's armored hide deflected most of the attack. Only shallow cuts formed along its legs, oozing thick, dark blood. The creature growled in pain and rage, swinging its other arm in a wide arc. The sheer force of the swing shattered the ground, sending chunks of blood-infused stone flying in all directions. Altashar dodged effortlessly, his smirk widening.
"Tough hide.
I'll have to get creative." He extended his arms, and the pools of blood around him began to writhe and rise, forming massive tendrils that snaked toward the Titan. The creature roared again, slamming its fists into the ground to disperse the attack, but Altashar was already moving, weaving through the chaos like a shadow. The fight became a whirlwind of destruction. The Titan's blows were devastating, each one capable of leveling a building, but Altashar's speed and precision kept him just out of reach. He exploited every opening, every moment of hesitation, his attacks growing more relentless with each passing second. Finally, Altashar saw his opportunity. The Titan reared back, preparing to unleash a massive energy blast from its gaping maw.
Altashar didn't hesitate.
He thrust his hand forward, and the blood around him surged upward, forming a massive spear of crimson energy. "Let's end this," he growled, his voice dark and filled with unrestrained malice. The spear shot forward with blinding speed, piercing through the Titan's open mouth and out the back of its skull. The creature froze, its 6 eyes dimming as a guttural sound escaped its throat. It collapsed with a thunderous crash, its massive body disintegrating into a pool of dark blood. Altashar stood over the remains, his breathing steady despite the intense battle. He extended his hand, and the remnants of the Titan's energy were drawn toward him, absorbed into his aura. A notification flashed on his watch. Dungeon cleared. Rewards acquired: Blood Sovereign's Core, high-grade mana crystals, crimson armor blueprint. Altashar's smirk returned as he examined the core, a pulsating blood-red sphere brimming with power.
Not bad, he murmured.
Time's over, I guess I will return later. The dungeon began to shake, signaling its collapse now that its sovereign was defeated. Altashar turned toward the swirling portal that had appeared at the far end of the chamber. As he walked, the pools of blood rippled and shifted, almost as if bowing to him. Until next time, he said softly, stepping through the portal. As Asher stepped out of the portal, his breath hitched. A strange sensation washed over him, a sense of disconnection that gnawed at the edges of his awareness. His hands trembled faintly, his fingers twitching as if they belonged to someone else. The warm sunlight on his skin did little to soothe the unease brewing inside him. What is this? He thought, his crimson eyes narrowing. His heart raced, beating out a frantic rhythm. It felt like he was standing outside his own body, a mere spectator watching someone else control his movements. Memories of the dungeon flashed in his mind, the precision of his strikes, the unrestrained malice that had coursed through him, the thrill of destruction. Yet, there was a detachment to those memories, as if they belonged to another version of him, not the Asher who now stood under the clear sky. He clenched his fists, willing the trembling to stop. His body obeyed, but there was an unnatural sharpness to the movement, almost mechanical. This isn't the first time, Asher realized, his thoughts swirling. He recalled previous battles, moments where his actions felt too smooth, too precise, beyond even his exceptional skills. Those times, he had dismissed it as adrenaline, as instinct taking over. But now, a cold sweat ran down his back. Am I losing control? The murmurs of the crowd nearby drew his attention. Their awe-filled gazes, the hushed whispers of his performance, all seemed distant, muffled by the storm inside him. Darren Dagon's voice cut through the haze.
Magnus, you all right?
You look like you've seen a ghost. Asher turned to Darren, his expression hardening. I'm fine, he said curtly, his voice steadier than he felt. Darren Dagon leaned casually against a nearby pillar, a cocky smirk plastered across his face. You really do know how to make an entrance, Magnus. Or should I say, an exit? His tone was dripping with mockery. Asher halted in his tracks, crimson eyes narrowing as they locked onto Darren. I mean, not many come out of a gold-ranked dungeon looking like they've been to hell and back, Darren continued, laughing. What happened in there? Did the monsters scare you that bad? Thought you Magnus types were supposed to be unshakable. Asher's smirk faded, his expression growing cold and calculating. You'd better hope you're never in my way, Dagon, he said, his voice icy and deliberate. Darren pushed off the pillar, stepping closer until he was face to face with Asher. His golden eyes gleamed with amusement. Or what? Asher leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. Or I'll drain every last drop of blood from your body and hang you up like a dried-out rag on a washing line. Darren's smirk widened. And I'll turn you into my obedient little beast, Magnus, he said, his tone just as sharp. The tension between the two was palpable as their auras flared, each daring the other to make the first move. Before either could escalate further, a staff member overseeing dungeon activity approached briskly. No fights are allowed here, the man said firmly, his stern gaze flicking between the two. If you two have an issue, take it to the arena. Otherwise, step aside. The reminder of the rules didn't quell the animosity, but Darren took a deliberate step back, his smirk still intact. How about it, Magnus? Want me to show you why you're second to me? Asher's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. Let's settle this then, he said coolly. Darren gestured toward the arena with a mock bow. After you. As the two made their way toward the designated combat grounds, Darren's thoughts churned beneath his confident exterior. First rank or not, I'll humiliate you today, Magnus. By the time I'm done, you'll be nothing more than a laughingstock at this academy. Asher, on the other hand, didn't think that much. For him, Darren is nothing but a guy with overinflated ego. The path to the arena was tense, but for Asher, it was also amusing in its own way. Darren strutted slightly ahead, his posture exuding cocky confidence as though he had already won. Asher followed at a leisurely pace, his crimson eyes half-lidded, betraying a lack of interest. Does he think this will be anything other than a waste of my time? Asher thought, suppressing a chuckle. To him, Darren Dagon was just another loudmouth with a fragile ego, a common sight in a place filled with elites. When they arrived at the arena, the staff had already begun preparing the field. The space was vast, encased in shimmering energy barriers designed to contain even the most destructive clashes. Students from various classes, drawn by the rumor of a fight between two S-class elites, were gathering in the stands, whispering excitedly. Magnus versus Dagon? This is going to be good. Bet Darren's gonna wipe the floor with him. That guy's a beast. Yeah, but Magnus did just come out of a gold-ranked dungeon. He's probably got some tricks up his sleeve. The murmurs didn't faze Asher, but Darren reveled in the attention. He raised a hand to the crowd, flashing his trademark smirk. You're about to see why I'm the rightful top rank, he announced confidently, his voice echoing across the arena. Asher rolled his eyes. Rightful top rank, huh? He stepped into the arena without fanfare, his demeanor calm yet commanding. The announcer, a faculty member overseeing the match, stepped forward. This will be a one-on-one duel. No lethal force is permitted. Victory is declared when one fighter yields, is incapacitated, or steps out of bounds. Both combatants nodded. Magnus. Dagon. Take your positions. Asher cracked his knuckles, his smirk faintly returning. Hope you brought more than just that inflated ego, Dagon, he said, his tone casual. Darren sneered, summoning a wave of mana that rippled around him. Oh, don't worry, Magnus. I brought enough to put you in your place. The energy barriers locked into place, and the faculty member raised a hand. Begin. The arena erupted in a flash of light as Darren made the first move. With a powerful burst of mana, he summoned a massive beast, a hulking dragon-like creature with black scales and glowing blue eyes. Meet my partner, Darren said smugly. Let's see if your blood magic can handle this. Asher stood his ground, watching as the beast roared and charged toward him. He extended his hand, crimson energy swirling around it like a living entity. His Blood Supreme ability activated, and the pools of blood left by his previous dungeon expedition materialized, forming a barrier in front of him. The crowd gasped as the dragon's claws met the barrier, only to be stopped cold. Asher's eyes gleamed with amusement. Cute pet, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Darren growled, his pride stung. Let's see you handle this. He commanded the beast to breathe a torrent of blue fire. Asher sidestepped effortlessly, using the blood from his barrier to form a whip that lashed out at the creature. The whip wrapped around the dragon's neck, tightening like a vice as Asher pulled. You'll have to do better than this, Dagon, Asher said, his tone eerily calm. Darren's expression faltered slightly, but he quickly masked it with anger. Don't get cocky, he shouted, summoning another surge of mana to enhance the dragon's strength. The arena shook as the dragon roared again, breaking free of the whip and charging with renewed ferocity. But Asher remained unfazed, his blood manipulation shifting fluidly between offense and defense. The battle was just beginning, but already the spectators could feel the tension. Darren fought with raw power and spectacle, but Asher's calculated precision and mastery of his abilities were like a cold storm, slowly eroding Darren's confidence. Dragon Blast! Darren shouted, as his dragon unleashed a searing breath attack. Asher simply leaned to the side, clenching his fist. The blood barrier extended, enveloping the dragon before Asher commanded, explode. The dragon was blown to pieces in an instant, disintegrating into a cloud of red mist. Darren stood frozen for a moment, eyes wide in disbelief. The massive dragon he'd summoned had been obliterated in an instant, its fiery breath and imposing form reduced to nothing more than scattered remnants of blood and charred scales. Asher's cold gaze never wavered, his expression one of casual indifference, as though it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. His blood manipulation was on full display, the blood from the dragon's remains now floating around him like an ethereal fog, pulsating with his command. Do you have any more? Asher repeated, his voice smooth and calm, devoid of any hint of struggle. Darren's fists clenched, his teeth gritting as he took a step back. He had underestimated Magnus, assuming his brute strength would be enough to intimidate him. But now, it was clear Asher's control over blood magic was far beyond what he'd anticipated. With a scowl, Darren summoned a new wave of energy, his body crackling with raw power. You think this is over, Magnus? He growled. You're not the only one who's got tricks up his sleeve. With a scowl, Darren summoned a new wave of energy, his body crackling with raw power. You think this is over, Magnus? He growled. You're not the only one who's got tricks up his sleeve. He raised both hands to the sky, and the ground trembled beneath them. Massive stone pillars began to rise from the earth, each one sharp and jagged like the claws of a beast. This is my real strength, Darren declared. I'll bury you under my power. Asher simply watched, his crimson eyes flicking between the rising pillars. He had seen enough. Darren's tactics were as predictable as his arrogance. The pillars were just another futile attempt to gain control of the fight. "You're not as clever as you think, Dagon," Asher muttered, raising his hand. With a flick of his wrist, the blood around him surged forward, slicing through the stone pillars with effortless precision. The air grew heavy with tension as the once imposing stone pillars crumbled into dust. Asher walked forward, unbothered by the destruction around him. Darren's eyes widened as he watched his attack disintegrate before him. His heart raced, and for the first time, doubt began to creep in. You're insane," Darren stammered, trying to steady himself. "There's no way you can keep this up." "Overlord Union!" Darren shouted, his voice echoing across the arena. A massive earth dragon emerged from his magical aura and began merging with him in a blinding flash of light. When the glow subsided, Darren stood transformed, a humanoid dragon, resembling a heavily armored lizard man with bulging muscles and glowing yellow serpentine eyes. "This is my power, Magnus," Darren said, his voice deeper and more resonant, reverberating through the arena. His elongated snout curled into a savage grin as he continued, "By fusing with my beast, I not only gain its strength but also its magic. Now, you'll see what true power looks like." Without wasting another moment, Darren extended his clawed hands, summoning 6 massive stone blades that hovered ominously around him. With a sharp wave of his arm, the blades shot toward Asher like deadly missiles. Asher's expression shifted, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Now, you're making this interesting for me too." He raised his hand, blood swirling around him in a vortex before forming 6 crimson blades to match Darren's stone weapons. The 2 sets of blades clashed mid-air with an ear-splitting impact, sparks flying as blood and stone collided in a dazzling display of power. "Not bad," Asher said, his crimson eyes glowing brighter as he surveyed Darren's new form. "Looks like you've finally made yourself worthy of my attention." Darren snarled, charging toward Asher with lightning speed, his claws gleaming. Asher met his charge head-on, their weapons clashing in a flurry of sparks and shockwaves. Each strike sent ripples through the arena, the crowd watching in awe as the 2 fighters appeared evenly matched. "You're not as invincible as you think, Magnus," Darren roared, his claws slashing toward Asher's chest. Asher sidestepped the attack with ease, retaliating with a counterstrike from a blood-forged sword. The blade met Darren's scaled arm, cutting through the outer layer but failing to penetrate deeper. "God, now this is fun," Asher said with a cold chuckle. "For once, you're almost equal to me." Darren grinned viciously, his confidence surging.
Almost?
"You'll see soon enough, Magnus. I'm more than your equal." With that, the battle escalated, each combatant pushing their limits, their clash shaking the very foundations of the arena. The clash between Asher and Darren sent shockwaves through the arena, each impact resounding like thunder, shaking the ground beneath the spectators. The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and cheers, their eyes glued to the 2 combatants locked in a battle of raw power and technique. "Did you see that? Darren's dragon fusion form is insane," one student exclaimed, gripping the edge of their seat. "Yeah, but look at Magnus. He's not even breaking a sweat," another responded, awe and fear mingling in their voice. A deafening crash echoed as Asher's blood-forged sword collided with Darren's massive clawed hand, sending crimson sparks and stone fragments flying. The 2 fighters were evenly matched, their movements a blur to all but the most skilled observers. In the stands, Freya Enrose watched the fight with an inscrutable expression, her arms crossed as she leaned against the railing. "Darren's putting on quite the show," she murmured to herself, "but Magnus, he hasn't even tapped into his full strength yet." "Come on, Darren." A group of students from his hometown cheered, waving banners with his name emblazoned in bold letters. "Show him what an overlord can do." Meanwhile, others watched in silence, mesmerized by Asher's cold, calculated demeanor. "He's a monster," one student whispered. "Look at his eyes, they're glowing like something out of a nightmare." Back in the arena, Darren unleashed a flurry of strikes with his massive stone blades, each swing causing the air to vibrate with power. Asher dodged and parried with fluid grace, his movements almost lazy as if he were toying with his opponent. "You're not bad, Dagon," Asher said, his voice dripping with icy confidence. "But not good enough." Darren roared, lunging forward with both claws aimed at Asher's torso. The crowd held their breath as the arena floor cracked beneath Darren's charge, the sheer force of his attack leaving a deep gouge in the stone. Asher sidestepped at the last possible moment, countering with a burst of crimson energy that erupted from the ground, striking Darren in the chest and forcing him back. The crowd gasped as Darren skidded to a halt, his armored form steaming from the impact. "Is that all you've got?" Asher taunted, a cold smirk playing on his lips. Darren growled, his glowing yellow eyes narrowing.
"Don't get cocky, Magnus."
"I'm just getting started." "That's what they all say," Asher replied, his voice calm yet mocking. In the stands, the tension was palpable. Students leaned forward, their eyes darting between the fighters. Some whispered bets, while others exchanged nervous glances, unable to predict the outcome. "This is insane," one A-class student said, shaking their head. "If this is what S-class fights look like, I don't even want to imagine what the ranking challenges will be like." Asher raised his hand, and the blood from the shattered blades around him coalesced into a massive crimson spear. The weapon pulsed with a dark, ominous energy as he pointed it toward Darren. "Let's see if your dragon armor can withstand this," Asher said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with anticipation as the next phase of the fight began. The arena grew silent, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. The two combatants stared each other down, their respective auras crackling with unrelenting power. Darren stood tall in his overlord fusion form, his golden eyes radiating a primal, unyielding force. His draconic claws flexed, glowing with molten energy, and the jagged stones covering his body shimmered as if alive. Asher, on the other hand, remained eerily calm. His crimson eyes glowed brighter, the blood pooling at his feet swirling upward as if obeying his unspoken command. The crowd was on edge, their collective breaths held, sensing the fight was reaching its climax. "You've been holding back, Magnus," Darren growled, his voice a deep, guttural mix of his own and the dragon's.
"I can feel it."
"You think you're better than me, don't you?" Asher tilted his head slightly, his smirk colder than ice.
"Think? No, Dagon.
"I know I'm better." Darren roared, his claws slashing through the air as he lunged forward, each step cracking the stone floor beneath him.
Asher didn't flinch.
Instead, with a fluid motion, he summoned a torrent of crimson blades that spiraled around him like a hurricane. The first clash was explosive. Darren's claws collided with Asher's spinning blood blades, sending shockwaves rippling through the arena. The crowd shielded their faces from the debris, their screams barely audible over the deafening sound of battle. Darren pressed forward, his monstrous strength forcing Asher back a step. But Asher countered with a sweeping gesture, sending a wave of blood spikes toward Darren. The spikes struck his armored form, but Darren roared through the pain, using his claws to shatter them mid-flight. "Not bad," Darren admitted, his voice a mix of grudging respect and feral anger. "But you'll have to do better than that." With a powerful leap, Darren soared into the air, the wings on his back spreading wide. From above, he unleashed a barrage of glowing stone projectiles, each one crashing toward Asher like meteors. Asher moved swiftly, weaving through the barrage with inhuman precision. His feet barely touched the ground as he darted forward, closing the gap between him and Darren. With a flick of his wrist, he created a massive scythe from his blood, its blade dark and shimmering with malevolent energy. "Blood Reaper Scythe," Asher intoned, his voice calm and cold. The crowd gasped as the scythe arced through the air, its sheer size and speed making it seem impossible to dodge. Darren snarled, crossing his claws in front of him to block the attack. The impact was cataclysmic, a shock wave of crimson energy rippling outward as Darren was sent crashing to the ground. Darren groaned, rising to his feet with a furious glare. His fusion form shimmered, cracks forming in his armor. Yet, his determination didn't waver. "You think that's enough to beat me?" Darren's aura surged as he unleashed a deafening roar, the ground trembling beneath him. His body began to glow, molten light seeping through the cracks in his armor.
"This is it, Magnus. My ultimate move.
Let's see if you can handle the full wrath of an overlord." Darren opened his mouth, a blinding sphere of energy forming between his jaws. The heat was intense, the very air around him distorting from the sheer power. "Dragon's Inferno!" he roared, releasing a massive beam of molten energy. The beam tore through the air like a raging comet, aimed directly at Asher. Asher's eyes narrowed as he raised his scythe, the blood around him swirling faster, forming a massive crimson vortex. He planted his feet firmly, gripping the scythe with both hands. "Time to end this," Asher muttered. With a surge of his own energy, he swung the Blood Reaper scythe downward. The scythe unleashed a colossal wave of crimson energy, a cutting force so powerful it seemed to rend the very fabric of the arena. The two attacks collided in mid-air, the clash of energies creating a cataclysmic explosion that shook the entire academy. The audience screamed as they were forced to shield themselves from the gale force winds and debris flying in every direction. For a moment, the arena was consumed by blinding light and deafening noise. When the dust finally settled, the crowd gasped at the sight before them. Darren was on one knee, his fusion form shattered, smoke rising from his battered body. His golden eyes were dim, his breathing ragged. He clutched at his side, blood dripping onto the scorched ground beneath him. Asher stood a few meters away, his scythe dissipating into a mist of crimson droplets. Though his breathing was steady, his usually pristine uniform was tattered, and a faint cut adorned his cheek, a rare mark of vulnerability. "You damn monster," Darren muttered, his voice weak but defiant. Asher's cold gaze remained fixed on Darren.
A monster, am I? Perhaps.
"But at least I know my limits. You, on the other hand, overestimate yours." Darren let out a weak chuckle, collapsing onto his back. "You've got me this time, but don't think for a second this is over." The audience erupted into cheers and applause, their earlier fear now replaced with awe at the sheer spectacle they had witnessed. "That was insane," one student shouted. "Magnus really is on another level," another murmured. Freya, watching from the stands, smiled faintly. "As expected of you, Asher." Asher turned and began to walk away, the crowd parting to make way for him. He didn't bask in the cheers or acknowledge the praise. To him, this fight had been just another obstacle, a stepping stone on his path to absolute power. As he exited the arena, his crimson eyes glowed faintly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Next time, bring something more interesting, Dagon." As Asher began to walk away from the arena, his footsteps echoed on the stone floor. His crimson eyes glimmered faintly, and a small smirk played on his lips. "Though I have to say, it was fun," he mumbled under his breath. Suddenly, a familiar chime resonated in his mind, and a translucent screen appeared before his eyes.
New quest.
Objective: remain the top ranker in the academy and fight one opponent every week. Reward: skills will vary depending on the opponent defeated. Fight against Darren Dagon completed. Congratulations on obtaining the skill, Blood Flames. Asher's smirk widened slightly as he read the notification.
Blood flames, huh? Interesting.
Asher's smirk widened slightly as he read the notification.
Blood flames, huh? Interesting.
He clenched his fist experimentally, channeling his newly acquired skill. A faint crimson flame flickered to life in his palm, its heat intense yet oddly soothing. The flames danced with an otherworldly glow, radiating power, potential destruction, and life too. Asher extinguished the flame with a snap of his fingers and continued walking toward the S-class dorms, his thoughts turning to the challenges ahead. "So, the better the rewards, the better for me." The roar of the crowd faded into the background as he disappeared into the corridor, leaving behind whispers of awe and fear. A week passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. The first day of classes had arrived, and the academy's halls were buzzing with energy. Asher stood in front of the mirror in his room, adjusting the lapels of his uniform. The S-Class Academy student uniform was a blend of black, gold, and white, a sleek, tailored suit reminiscent of noble attire. It radiated authority and class, perfectly suited for the Academy's elite. He straightened the cuffs and studied his reflection. His crimson eyes glowed faintly as he tilted his head. "Not bad," he muttered, a faint smirk tugging at his lips before he grabbed his belongings and stepped out. As he approached the common corridor, he spotted Freya waiting for him. She leaned casually against the wall, her own S-Class uniform fitting her perfectly, exuding elegance and confidence. "I thought you disliked me," Asher remarked, raising a brow as he walked up to her. Freya glanced at him with a sly smile.
Dislike?
"No. I don't lie about my tastes, Magnus. I like powerful men." Asher's expression remained neutral. "Can't say I feel the same." She chuckled, falling into step beside him. "Not my fault." Asher didn't respond, keeping his stride steady as the two walked toward their first class. "You really should try to socialize more," Freya said, breaking the silence. "A whole week went by, and you hardly left your room. Except for those dungeon explorations and that incident with Darren again. Do I look like someone who needs to?" Asher replied, his voice calm but laced with sarcasm. "Yes," Freya said bluntly, her golden eyes meeting his. "You do. Even if you're powerful, connections matter. You'll figure that out soon enough." Her words lingered in the air as they entered the massive lecture hall for their first class. The room was grand, with high ceilings and a semicircular arrangement of seats that surrounded a central podium. Freya took a seat near the middle, but Asher opted for a spot closer to the back, near the window. Freya shot him a pointed look. "Why the back? You'll barely hear anything." "Exactly," Asher replied, resting his chin on his hand as he stared out the window. "Why waste time listening to things I already know?" Freya rolled her eyes, but she let it go, turning her attention to the other students filing in. The room filled quickly, about 30 or so S-Class students taking their places. A subtle tension hung in the air, each student assessing their peers, trying to gauge where they stood in the hierarchy. Asher could feel their gazes lingering on him, some curious, others wary. "I wonder what they'll teach today," Asher murmured to himself, his voice low as he leaned back in his chair, gazing at the early morning sky through the window. Moments later, the door to the hall opened, and the instructor entered. The hum of conversation died instantly as all eyes turned toward the front. Asher straightened slightly, his curiosity piqued despite himself. The teacher strode into the room with an air of calm authority. He appeared to be a man in his prime, dressed in the same coat as the students but with subtle golden accents that marked his rank. His sharp gaze swept over the class, pausing briefly on Asher, who sat near the back. "Why are you sitting so far back?" the instructor asked, his voice steady but carrying a hint of curiosity. Asher tilted his head slightly, crimson eyes meeting the teacher's. "I just don't like crowds," he replied, his tone nonchalant. The instructor chuckled softly. "Opposite of your mother, I see. She was like a buzzing bee when she was here, always in the center of attention." Asher's expression didn't change, but the mention of his mother piqued his interest. "Anyway," the instructor continued, stepping to the front of the room, "my name is Reynold Garcia, and I will be your instructor for developing your innate abilities." The room was silent as Reynold continued, his presence commanding. "As for my qualifications," he added with a sly smile, "my name is enough for all of you." He turned to the board, jotting down a few things as Asher leaned back, processing the name. Reynold Garcia. Asher's mind churned, recalling what he knew about the man. Reynold Garcia was a name well known in the elite circles. Like most members of the Garcia family, he possessed the ability to manipulate strings, but Reynold had taken this ability to unparalleled heights. His mastery over strings was so advanced that he had allied with the Saint family to tune his strings to the sharpness of blades, making them nearly indestructible and capable of piercing even the toughest defenses. The class sat in rapt attention as Reynold turned back to them. His eyes scanned the room, exuding confidence. "Now," Reynold said, his voice cutting through the silence, "each of you possesses abilities that make you extraordinary, but potential is nothing without refinement. That's what we'll be focusing on." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "You're the best of the best, the S-class, but don't let that title make you complacent. Your opponents, both here and beyond these walls, will not care about your rank. They'll care about how strong you are in practice. And let me assure you, strength comes from mastery." The words resonated with many of the students. Asher, however, remained impassive, though he couldn't deny a flicker of respect for Reynold's presence and reputation. The class tensed as Reynold's sharp gaze locked onto the nearest student. Asher watched the unfolding scene with mild interest, his mind wandering back to Reynold's earlier comment.
"Buzzing bee, huh?" he thought.
Mother really left a mark here. Reynold glanced back toward Asher, a subtle smirk tugging at his lips.
"Magnus," he called.
"I'll save you for last. Remind them what a top ranker means." Asher's face remained passive as he shrugged. "Whatever you say, instructor." Reynold nodded, turning back to the class. "Rank 40, step up to the stage," he commanded. A young man stood and approached the platform. "My name is Aaron Luis, and my ability is Spirit Bow," he announced confidently as a crimson-colored bow materialized in his hands. "Spirit Bow, an attack-type weapon manifestation ability," Reynold explained, jotting notes onto a clipboard. Weapon-type manifestation abilities fall under the common category. In Aaron's case, he can summon a weapon, and that weapon comes with a unique skill. Upon breaking through to the next rank, you gain an additional skill. Reynold gestured toward Aaron. "Now Aaron, demonstrate the skill you obtained when you broke into the foundation rank." Aaron nodded, stepping to the center of the stage. "Here?" he asked for confirmation. Reynold inclined his head. "Yes, here." "Don't worry. The classroom is equipped with sensors that will neutralize any attack exceeding 10 meters beyond the attacker. It's all perfectly safe, so don't hold back," Reynold said, and then he added with slight chuckle, "Though aim at the window, as we don't know when Goddess of Misfortune smile upon us," hearing him other chuckle too as they looked at Aaron next. Aaron nodded again. Taking a steadying breath, he raised his spirit bow, aiming at the reinforced window. Crimson flames swirled around the arrow as he pulled the string taut. A glowing flaming bird took shape and shot forward with a sharp whoosh, its wings spreading wide as it streaked across the stage. The fiery projectile struck the window with a controlled explosion, the impact radiating outward but dissipating before it could extend beyond the protective barrier. "That was your first skill, Flame Bird Wave, correct?" Reynold said, jotting down more notes. "It's an excellent beginner skill. You're quite fortunate to have awakened such a versatile attack in your foundation rank. Skills like this can evolve as you reach higher realms, such as Platinum or Diamond, where you can gain one new skill per rank." Aaron nodded, though Reynolds' tone turned critical. "However, I noticed that your hands were trembling slightly as you aimed, and your breathing was uneven. Your form is weak for someone at your rank, and the power behind the attack should have been stronger. For now, your training should focus on strengthening your core. Building a solid foundation will allow you to maximize your ability's potential. Right now, finesse is more important than power. Without it, you'll plateau quickly. Aaron nodded solemnly and returned to his seat. Reynolds scanned the room, his sharp gaze locking onto the next student. Rank 39, step up to the stage, he instructed as a girl rose and approached the platform. The girl stepped onto the stage with an air of confidence. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady as she addressed the class. "My name is Evelyn Ward," she announced, her voice clear and strong. "My ability is Crystal Barrier." As she spoke, a faint shimmer surrounded her hands, and with a flick of her wrist, translucent, diamond-like crystals began forming around her, shimmering in the dim light. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A defensive ability, I see. Crystal Barrier is a rare manifestation for someone at your rank. It's classified as a support defense hybrid. Am I correct in assuming it also has offensive capabilities when enhanced?"
Evelyn nodded.
"Yes, instructor. The barriers can be manipulated into sharp projectiles if needed, but my current focus has been on perfecting its defensive properties." "Good," Reynolds said, motioning toward the stage. "Show us the primary form of your ability. Create a defensive structure, and I'll test its strength." Evelyn took a deep breath and held her hands out. A low hum resonated through the room as the crystals expanded, forming a thick, dome-like barrier around her. The structure sparkled with refracted light, appearing both elegant and impenetrable. Reynolds nodded, impressed. "Solid construction for your rank. But appearances can be deceiving. Let's see how well it holds." He snapped his fingers, and a training orb floated into the air beside him. With a flick of his hand, the orb pulsed, sending out a concentrated energy beam directly at Evelyn's barrier. The beam struck with a loud crack, causing the crystals to vibrate, but the structure held firm, absorbing the impact. "Not bad," Reynolds remarked, pacing around the dome. "Your barrier absorbed about 80% of the force, dispersing the rest into the ground. For a foundation rank ability, that's commendable. But what happens when you're under sustained pressure?" Without waiting for her response, Reynolds summoned 3 more orbs. They circled the dome, firing rapid bursts of energy at random intervals. The crystals shimmered with each impact, fine cracks beginning to spread across their surface. Evelyn's face grew tense, sweat beading on her forehead as she struggled to maintain the barrier. Her hands trembled slightly, but she grit her teeth and poured more energy into the structure. The cracks stopped spreading, and the dome held. Reynolds raised a hand, and the orbs ceased their assault. "Impressive," he said, his tone neutral but with a hint of approval. "Your control is above average, and your energy reserves are decent for your rank. However, I noticed that you overcompensate when under pressure. You poured too much energy into stabilizing the barrier, which would leave you vulnerable in a prolonged fight. Focus on efficiency, learn to patch weak points without wasting energy." Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as the barrier dissolved into shimmering fragments. "Understood, instructor," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion visible on her face. Reynolds gave a curt nod. "Return to your seat." As Evelyn walked back to her place, murmurs rippled through the class. It was clear that her performance had set a high standard, and the next student to be called would have big shoes to fill. "Your adventure continues at Empire." Reynolds turned his sharp gaze back to the roster. "Rank 38, step forward." The teacher's sharp gaze locked onto the next student. "Rank 38, step forward," Reynolds commanded. The class watched with heightened anticipation as another student prepared to showcase their abilities. Asher, sitting silently in the back, observed it all with mild interest. One by one, the students stepped forward, each showcasing their unique abilities. The room was alive with tension and anticipation, the air charged with the thrill of discovery and the weight of Reynolds' critical gaze. The first few students displayed fairly common abilities, useful but not particularly extraordinary. Reynolds assessed them with a sharp eye, offering both praise and constructive criticism. One student, a young man with short black hair, demonstrated his ability to manipulate vines. He summoned a thick tangle of thorn greenery that spread across the stage, capturing one of Reynolds' summoned training orbs in a matter of seconds. "Vine snare," Reynolds remarked, pacing around the captured orb. "A classic crowd control ability. Your control is decent, but your execution is too slow. In real combat, a skilled opponent would have broken free before your vines could fully envelop them. Work on speed, or you'll find yourself outpaced by higher-ranked combatants." The next student, a petite girl with vibrant blue hair, stepped forward nervously. She introduced herself as Mia and revealed her ability to manipulate water. With a wave of her hands, she summoned a swirling torrent of water that coalesced into a sharp, spear-like form. "Water lance," Reynolds said, nodding thoughtfully as she launched the attack toward a designated target. The spear struck true, piercing through the reinforced dummy with surprising force. "Your aim is precise, and your technique is refined," Reynolds said, his tone softer than before. "But your power output is lacking." The lance barely punctured the dummy. For an ability like this to be effective in combat, it needs to carry more weight. Focus on increasing the density of your water constructs. Mia nodded, her cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and determination as she returned to her seat. A student with an ability called Echo Step followed, demonstrating his talent for duplicating himself in battle. He created 2 perfect replicas of himself that moved independently, attacking a training orb from 3 different angles. Reynolds watched with keen interest. "Impressive for your rank," he said. "Your clones are synchronized, and their movements are fluid. However, your own position gives you away. If an enemy figures out which is the original, your entire strategy falls apart. Train yourself to blend in with your copies, or learn to control them remotely." As more students took the stage, the class grew more animated, whispering among themselves about each performance. Abilities ranged from elemental manipulation to psychic powers, each one bringing a new challenge and earning a unique critique from Reynolds. One particularly striking student showcased the ability Shadowbind, summoning tendrils of darkness that slithered across the stage, trapping Reynolds' training orbs in an instant. The room buzzed with excitement at the sight, but Reynolds remained composed. "Shadow abilities are versatile and dangerous," he said, inspecting the tendrils. "Your control is excellent, but your shadows are fragile. A single burst of light energy would dissipate them entirely. Learn to fortify your constructs or pair them with complementary techniques." Despite his critiques, Reynolds' comments carried a sense of genuine investment in the students' growth. Each piece of advice was tailored to the individual, leaving them with a clear understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. By the time Reynolds called for rank 20, the class was buzzing with energy, the atmosphere charged with a mix of awe and determination. Asher remained seated at the back, his expression unreadable as he observed the proceedings. Reynolds' gaze eventually landed on him again, a glimmer of expectation in his sharp eyes. "Magnus," he said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I saved you for last for a reason. Let's see if you're worthy of that top rank." Read latest stories on Empire. Asher rose from his seat, the room falling silent in an instant. All eyes were on him as he stepped onto the stage, his calm demeanor radiating an aura of quiet confidence. "Whatever you say, instructor," he replied coolly, his crimson eyes glinting under the room's light. The stage was set for the top ranker to show what made him different from the rest. Asher stepped onto the stage, his movements unhurried, exuding an air of indifference that only heightened the anticipation in the room. The class watched in silence, their earlier murmurs dying down. Even Reynolds, who had maintained a composed demeanor throughout, seemed slightly more alert. "Magnus," Reynolds began, his tone sharp, "state your ability." Asher tilted his head slightly, his crimson eyes glinting with a faint amusement. "Blood manipulation," he said simply, his voice steady, almost bored. The class erupted in hushed whispers, students exchanging startled glances. Blood manipulation was a rare and powerful ability, often feared for its versatility and lethality. Many in this class are unlike the Supreme families and now they want to see it, though many of them has also saw it when Asher and Darren fought but mostly didn't saw it, as now Asher going to demonstrate it, they all look forward to it. "Silence," Reynolds ordered, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. He turned back to Asher, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "And powerful ability from one of the Supreme families. Show me how you've honed it." Asher raised a hand, and the air around him seemed to shift. His veins glowed faintly as crimson orbs of blood began to materialize, swirling lazily around him. The orbs solidified into sharp, blade-like constructs, each one pulsing with a menacing energy. "Blood blades," Asher announced casually. He flicked his wrist, and the blades shot forward, striking Reynolds' summoned training orbs with pinpoint accuracy. The orbs shattered, unable to withstand the sheer force behind the attack. The class watched in stunned silence as Asher's blades returned to him, reforming into a single larger scythe that he held effortlessly in one hand. "Impressive," Reynolds said, his smirk widening. "Your control is precise, and your power is undeniable. But raw power isn't enough. Let's see how you fare under pressure." "Impressive," Reynolds said, his smile widening. "Your control is precise, and your power is undeniable. But raw power isn't enough. Let's see how you fare under pressure." With a snap of his fingers, Reynolds summoned multiple training orbs that floated around the stage, their movements erratic and unpredictable. Your task is simple, Reynolds continued. Destroy all the orbs within 30 seconds. If you fail, you'll lose your rank as top student. Asher raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips.
That's all. Reynolds' expression hardened. Begin.
The orbs shot toward Asher, moving at blinding speeds. The class watched, holding their breath as the stage became a blur of motion. Asher moved like a shadow, his scythe a crimson streak as it cleaved through the air. Each swing was deliberate, calculated, and devastatingly effective. The orbs shattered one after another, unable to match his speed and precision. Blood tendrils erupted from the ground, ensnaring the remaining orbs and pulling them into the path of Asher's scythe. Within 20 seconds, the stage was clear, the shattered remains of the orbs scattered around Asher's feet. The class broke into murmurs, a mix of awe and disbelief at the sheer efficiency of Asher's performance. Reynolds watched him with an appraising look, his smirk returning. Well done, Magnus, Reynolds said, his tone carrying a rare note of approval. You've proven yourself worthy of your rank. But remember, staying at the top is harder than reaching it.
Don't get complacent.
Asher lowered his scythe, the weapon dissolving back into crimson mist that vanished into the air. He gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Noted, he replied simply, turning to leave the stage. As he walked back to his seat, the class parted like the Red Sea, their gazes following him with a mix of admiration and wariness. Freya, who sat near the middle, gave him a sly smile as he passed. Show off, she whispered teasingly. Asher didn't reply, but the faintest twitch of a smile crossed his lips. Reynolds clapped his hands, drawing the class's attention back to him.
Class dismissed, he announced.
Reflect on what you've seen today. The academy isn't just a place for learning, it's a battlefield. Those who stagnate will be left behind. As the students began filing out of the room, Asher remained seated, his gaze fixed on the window. He could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken challenge in their eyes. Freya lingered beside him, leaning casually against his desk. So, what's next for the great Magnus? She asked, her tone light but curious. Asher glanced at her, his crimson eyes narrowing slightly. Maybe you should leave me alone, he said, his tone as sharp as his gaze. Are you gay? Freya suddenly asked, tilting her head curiously. A twitch of irritation crossed his face. We're not even 10, he replied, his voice dripping with exasperation. Still, Freya said, leaning closer with a playful glint in her golden eyes, a beautiful girl like me is practically throwing herself at you, and yet you're ignoring me. Makes a girl wonder. Asher stared at her for a long moment, noting the way she carried herself, confident, persistent, and annoyingly self-assured. Her expression was one of mock innocence, but her smirk betrayed her amusement at his discomfort. Her antics left him mildly amused yet irritated, and he couldn't help the faint chill that ran down his spine as her unwavering gaze locked onto him. You just thought something rude, didn't you? Freya accused, her tone teasing but her eyes narrowing slightly, as though daring him to deny it. Asher looked back at her, his face impassive as he replied coolly, You're imagining things. Freya pouted, stepping back with a mock huff. Fine, keep pretending you're not interested. But don't think I'll give up that easily, Magnus. Asher sighed, running a hand through his hair. Do what you want, he muttered, turning his attention back to the window. Freya smirked, clearly enjoying herself.
Oh, I will.
But still, let's go and check out other things, she said once again. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. Asher sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Freya, just stop, he said, his voice heavy with exasperation. Why are you even bothering me? Go tease someone else. Freya smirked, leaning closer. Because it's fun watching you squirm. You're so serious all the time, Magnus. Lighten up a bit. Asher glanced at her, his crimson eyes narrowing further. We're here to train, not to entertain your boredom. Freya pouted dramatically, flipping her hair over her shoulder.
Oh, come on.
Life's more than just training and fighting, you know. And for the record, I'm not running after you. I'm just curious. Curious about what? Asher's tone was sharper now, his patience wearing thin. Freya grinned mischievously. About what makes someone like you tick. You're like a puzzle, serious, distant, and way too good at everything. It's intriguing. Her voice lowered, almost teasing. And maybe, just maybe, I enjoy seeing that stoic face of yours crack a little. Asher leaned back in his seat, glaring at her. You're impossible.
She winked. And you're predictable.
That's why I win this round. Asher groaned, deciding it wasn't worth the effort to argue. Whatever helps you sleep at night, he muttered, standing up and slinging his bag over his shoulder. Freya followed, her hands clasped behind her back, still smiling. So, what's next on the agenda, O mighty top ranker? Finding somewhere quiet, Asher replied dryly, walking faster in an attempt to outpace her. Good luck with that, Freya said, easily keeping up. But just so you know, I'm not giving up. You're way too interesting for that. Asher didn't respond, but as they walked down the hallway, he couldn't help but feel a mix of irritation and reluctant amusement. Freya's persistence was as frustrating as it was baffling, but somehow, it kept his mind from wandering to darker places. Maybe having someone like her around wasn't the worst thing in the world, if only she'd stop being so annoying. The World Academy prided itself on molding students into exceptional warriors, scholars, and leaders. The curriculum was as diverse as it was challenging, each subject tailored to prepare the young minds for a world teeming with mysteries, dangers, and opportunities. Asher then moved to next class with Freya in tow. Next was history class. Many looked bored by the name of it, but of Asher it's like reading a new book, so he was eager for it. The next class was in an ancient, grand lecture hall with vaulted ceilings, where the walls were adorned with murals depicting significant events from the history of the realms. Professor Eldrin, a wizened elf whose ageless face bore 1,000 tales, stood at the center of the room. His robes shimmered faintly, as if imbued with memories of ages past. History is not merely a recounting of dates and battles, Eldrin began, his voice rich and melodic. It is the foundation upon which our present is built and the key to understanding our future. Today, we delve into the War of Shattered Skies, the conflict that nearly annihilated our world. Asher sat near the back, his expression neutral as he absorbed the lecture. He appreciated the precision with which Eldrin narrated, weaving tales of the Dark Human's betrayal, the rise of the primordial titans, past heroes, and the heroism of the Dawnbringers, Heroes organization, who defeated and pushed back the ancient invaders. Freya, seated beside him, occasionally nudged his arm, whispering comments like, "Think we'd have survived back then?" Asher ignored her, his mind already racing ahead to connections between the history lesson and the current political tensions among the realms. The class soon ended as Asher moved to next class. This was Asher's favorite class. The dungeon simulation chamber was a marvel of modern magic and engineering, able to replicate the environments and dangers of real dungeons. Instructor Kale, a gruff dwarf with an unkempt beard and a knack for snorting every 5 words, greeted the class with a booming laugh. Welcome, fledglings. Today, we'll discuss anomalous dungeons. You never know what you'll face inside those unpredictable hellholes, but knowledge is your best weapon. The room transformed into a projection of a labyrinthine dungeon, its walls glowing faintly with arcane runes. Kale walked through the illusion as if it were real, pointing out traps hidden in plain sight, runic patterns indicating elemental hazards, and signs of lurking dungeon bosses. Remember, not all dungeons are treasure troves, Kale warned. Some are prisons, designed to keep something in. If you stumble into one of those, best turn tail unless you're prepared to face nightmares. Asher listened intently, recalling his own few ventures into minor dungeons. This knowledge could mean the difference between life and death in the future. Freya, meanwhile, leaned closer and whispered, "Bet you'd still survive one of those prisons." Asher sighed as she said, "There are ways to survive them too." Freya nodded while Kale continued to describe the most common traps and such found in dungeons usually. Soon, this class ended too as the time for next class came. It was somewhat like history class, though this war is still going on. The class on invaders was held in a somber, shadowy chamber lined with preserved relics from past conflicts, broken invader weapons, fragments of their armor, and even the remnants of an alien-like skull encased in crystal. Professor Morgoth, a former battle mage who had lost an arm in a clash with invaders, paced the room, his prosthetic limb crackling with faint blue energy. He didn't regrow his arm with the help of healing specialized families, as according to his words it reminds him of his carelessness and haughtiness of his younger days. "Invaders are not of this realm," Morgoth began, his gravelly voice filling the room. "They come from the distant planets, where our understanding of physics, magic, and life ceases to function. You must unlearn your assumptions when facing them." The class studied sketches of different invader species, the humanoid voidborn with their glass-like skin, the chittering insectoid hive, and the massive behemoths that crushed entire armies. Morgoth's lessons emphasized one core principle: never underestimate an invader. Even the smallest could wield powers that bent reality. "Magnus," Morgoth called, fixing his one good eye on Asher. "You're familiar with their tactics. How would you counter a voidborn ambush?" Asher thought for a moment before answering, "Separate their numbers. Voidborn rely on synchronization for their strength. Disrupt their unity, and they falter." Morgoth nodded approvingly. "Precisely. Remember that, class." Class continued as time to time Morgoth asks questions while students answers. Then came time for the arcane study. The branch tat develops new magics. This class is necessary as before human were able to awaken their innate abilities, it was magic that helped them, even now many develop on the path of mages rather than their inborn innate abilities. This subject delved into the intricacies of magic itself. Taught by Lady Arclight, a half-fae whose very presence seemed to hum with mana, the class explored the theoretical frameworks behind spells, enchantments, and mana flow. Today's lesson focused on mana convergence zones, places where mana density fluctuates wildly. Asher jotted down notes as Lady Arclight explained how these zones could enhance or destabilize spells, sometimes leading to catastrophic results. You, she said, pointing to Freya. What would you do if a convergence disrupted your fire spell mid-battle? Freya straightened, grinning.
Improvise.
If fire doesn't work, try lightning. Lady Arclight raised an eyebrow. A creative answer, but reckless. Always assess the zone's properties before experimenting. Overconfidence can be fatal. Asher smirked at Freya's chastised expression. Last class of the day turned out to be about leadership and such. The final class was held in an open arena. This was where students put theory into practice. Teams were formed, and scenarios were thrown at them, requiring quick thinking and cooperation. Today, the challenge was a mock siege defense. Asher was naturally elected leader for his team, while Freya took charge of the opposing side. The battle was intense, with both sides using tactics they'd learned. Asher's precision and calm under pressure clashed with Freya's unpredictability and flair for misdirection. The match ended in a narrow victory for Asher's team, though Freya claimed she'd let him win. By the end of the day, the students were physically and mentally exhausted, but the fire of competition and the hunger to improve burned brighter than ever. Asher returned to his dorm, his mind already reviewing everything he'd learned, while Freya lingered outside his door smirking. "Same time tomorrow, Magnus," she teased. Asher sighed, closing the door in her face without a word. Asher's day ended with a sense of fulfillment, though his mind was far from at rest. The structured chaos of the World Academy had a way of challenging even its most talented students. For him, it was less about the workload and more about the constant presence of individuals like Freya, whose persistence and playful demeanor tested his patience. The following morning arrived briskly, sunlight streaming through the large windows of his dorm. Asher stretched, his crimson eyes reflecting the golden hue of dawn. He dressed in the Academy's signature uniform, his movements methodical as he prepared for another day. Before long, a familiar knock came at his door. He sighed, already knowing who it was. Asher. Ready for another day of glorious education. Freya's cheerful voice called out. He opened the door, his expression as stoic as ever. "You're too early." Freya grinned. "A proper leader should be punctual, right? Besides, you love my company." He gave her a flat stare. "You're delusional." "Yet here I am," she said with a smirk, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the main academy building. The first class of the day was tactics and strategy, a critical subject for those aspiring to lead in battles or larger conflicts. The room was arranged like a war council chamber, with circular tables and an interactive projection system that displayed maps, battlefields, and troop movements. Their instructor, General Lorien, was a retired commander who had led numerous campaigns against invaders. His presence was commanding, his sharp gaze enough to silence any chatter. "War is not won by strength alone," Lorien began, his voice gravelly. "It is won by outthinking your enemy, by exploiting weaknesses, and by turning disadvantages into advantages." Asher found himself intrigued. Strategy appealed to his logical mind, and he listened intently as the general introduced a scenario, a small force tasked with defending a critical supply line against a much larger enemy. "Magnus," Lorien called out, gesturing toward the board. "You're in charge of the defenders. How do you handle this?" Asher stood, studying the map for a moment. "I'd establish choke points along the supply route," he began. "Force the enemy into narrow paths where their numbers are less effective. Use traps and ranged attacks to weaken them before engaging in direct combat." Lorien nodded, clearly impressed. "And what if the enemy adapts and flanks your position?" "I'd position reserves in hidden locations," Asher replied. "If they split their forces to flank, the reserves could intercept or delay them, buying time for the main defense to regroup." The general's approval was evident. "Good. Always plan for contingencies. That mindset will serve you well." Freya, seated nearby, gave Asher a thumbs up, her expression playful. "Looks like someone's gunning for top strategist." Asher ignored her, though the corners of his mouth twitched ever so slightly. The day continued with more classes, each demanding in its own way. By the time lunch arrived, Asher found a rare moment of solitude under a sprawling oak tree in the academy courtyard. The sounds of students chatting and laughing filled the air, but he remained focused on a book he'd borrowed from the library, a treatise on mana stabilization. Naturally, Freya found him. "Skipping the cafeteria again?" she asked, plopping down beside him without waiting for an invitation. "I prefer quiet," he replied, not looking up. "Your definition of quiet is boring," she teased. "You're always so serious. Don't you ever just relax?" Asher closed the book and looked at her. "Why are you so intent on bothering me?"
"Because it's fun," she said with a grin.
"And because I know there's more to you than this stoic act." He arched an eyebrow but said nothing, reopening his book. The afternoon brought combat techniques, a hands-on class held in the academy's expansive training grounds. Students sparred under the watchful eyes of instructors, testing their abilities in real combat scenarios. Freya and Asher were paired together, much to her delight and his annoyance. "You've been dying to fight me, haven't you?" she said, summoning her flame-coated daggers. Asher summoned his crimson blades, their sharp edges glinting menacingly. "If it means you'll stop talking, then yes." Their duel drew a crowd, as both were known for their skill. Freya's agility and unpredictable fighting style contrasted sharply with Asher's calculated precision. She darted around him, her daggers leaving trails of fire, while he blocked and countered with ease, his movements fluid and efficient. "You're holding back," she accused, her voice tinged with frustration.
"So are you," he retorted. Freya grinned. "All right then. No more games."
She unleashed a flurry of attacks, her flames intensifying as she moved with blinding speed. Asher met her strikes with calm determination, his blades glowing with a faint, ominous light. The clash of their weapons echoed across the training grounds, sparks flying with each collision. In the end, Asher disarmed her with a swift maneuver, his blade stopping mere inches from her neck. "Yield," he said, his voice even. Freya raised her hands in mock surrender, a satisfied smirk on her face.
"Fine.
You win this time, Magnus." Though, Asher didn't like the outcome as Freya's main ability is World Tree, though he knew class was about using weapons, so he didn't said much, and just nodded simply. The watching students erupted into applause, impressed by the display of skill. As the day wound down, Asher returned to his dorm, his mind buzzing with everything he'd learned and experienced. Though he wouldn't admit it, the academy was beginning to feel less like a challenge to conquer and more like a place where he could truly grow. Freya's persistent teasing might have been a nuisance, but even she added a layer of unpredictability to his otherwise structured life. For now, though, he relished the quiet of his room, preparing himself for whatever tomorrow would bring. The next morning came quickly, and with it, a renewed energy in the academy halls. Today was one of the most anticipated days for the students, Practical Trials Day. The academy scheduled these trials periodically to assess the students' growth in real-time scenarios, often pitting them against unpredictable challenges. Asher woke early, feeling the weight of expectation. He went through his morning routine efficiently, mentally preparing for whatever the academy had planned. Practical trials were never straightforward, and the instructors loved throwing curveballs to keep the students on their toes. By the time he reached the briefing hall, the room was abuzz with chatter. Students speculated on what kind of trial awaited them. Would it be a solo challenge?
Team-based? Combat-focused?
Freya was already waiting for him, leaning casually against the wall. "Took you long enough," she said with a grin. "You're usually the first one here." "I had better things to do than rush," he replied flatly.
Her grin widened. "Sure you did.
"So, what do you think today's trial will be?
Another dungeon simulation?
Maybe a survival challenge?" Before Asher could respond, the sharp sound of a bell silenced the room. Instructor Reynolds entered, his imposing presence commanding instant attention. Behind him, a massive projection appeared, displaying a forested area teeming with life and danger. "Today's trial is called The Hunt," Reynolds announced. "You'll be split into teams and sent into the Wildshade Forest, a biome specially constructed by our dungeon simulators. Your objective is simple: retrieve as many core shards as you can. These shards are hidden throughout the forest, guarded by creatures both mundane and magical." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Wildshade Forest was infamous for its unpredictable terrain and its challenges, often requiring a blend of combat prowess, teamwork, and strategy to navigate successfully. Reynolds continued, his gaze sweeping over the students. "The forest is divided into zones, each increasing in difficulty as you go deeper. The shards are more abundant, and more valuable, the further you venture. But be warned, the creatures in those zones will not hold back. Injuries are likely, and you may even face simulated death. Push yourself, but remember, recklessness will get you nowhere.
Freya nudged Asher. Sounds like fun.
Bet we'll end up on the same team. Asher gave her a sidelong glance.
Let's hope not.
The students were quickly divided into teams. Asher found himself assigned to a group of 5, including Freya. Much to his chagrin, she seemed genuinely delighted by the arrangement. Our leader's here, boys, she declared, slapping Asher on the back. The other team members were a mixed bunch. Caden, a brawny earth manipulator known for his blunt demeanor and raw strength. Leora, a sharp-eyed archer whose precision was rivaled only by her quick thinking. Kai, a quiet but resourceful illusionist who often stayed in the backgrounds. Freya, who needed no introduction, her flame-coated daggers already spinning in her hands as she grinned with unrestrained enthusiasm. Leaving aside her world tree ability, he many times felt as if she likes flames more as she even as flamehound daggers of legendary grades. These special daggers come with Crimson Hell Flame Ruler ability, allowing her to control flames as much as she wants. Freya just smiled knowing what he is thinking but didn't correct him as she has her own circumstances. Asher's team stood together at the edge of the Wildshade Forest, each member sizing up their companions and preparing for the challenges ahead. The simulated biome stretched out before them, a dense expanse of towering trees, tangled vines, and faintly glowing flora. The air buzzed with faint energy, hinting at the dangers lurking within. Freya, looking around, twirled her flamehound daggers, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "So, leader, what's the plan?" she asked, her tone teasing but expectant. Asher crossed his arms, his crimson eyes scanning the forest. "We need to move systematically. First, map out the area. Leora will scout ahead for traps or enemies. Kai, stay close and use your illusions to mask our movements if needed. Caden and I will handle any immediate threats. Freya, you're on crowd control. Use your flames to clear dense vegetation or distract larger threats." Freya mock saluted him. Aye, Captain." "Also, make use of your world tree to clear things out. We are in forest, use your ability. You are in your own domain," he said as Freya shrugged. "That's why I am not using it. World tree is powerful, but it is also weak," she said as Asher tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Never mind," she said as Asher just nodded as he nodded to others. The team moved out, each falling into their designated roles. Leora crept ahead, her movements silent as a shadow. Her keen eyes spotted small glimmers in the underbrush, core shards, faintly glowing with magical energy. 2 shards, 20 meters to the east, she whispered, pointing toward a cluster of thorny bushes. Kai created a faint illusion of rustling leaves in the opposite direction, drawing away a nearby predator that had been lurking. The team moved swiftly, retrieving the shards with minimal effort. The further they ventured into the forest, the more challenging the environment became. The first zone had been relatively tame, populated by low-level creatures like horned rabbits and vine serpents. But as they crossed into the second zone, the air grew heavier, and the creatures more aggressive. A pack of shadow wolves emerged from the underbrush, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They circled the group, their low growls sending a shiver down Kai's spine.
"Freya," Asher commanded. "Your turn."
Freya grinned, leaping forward with her daggers igniting into blazing arcs. The wolves hesitated, snarling at the sudden burst of flame. With a flourish, she created a wall of fire, forcing the pack to split and giving the team an opening to attack. Caden stepped up, slamming his fists into the ground. Jagged pillars of earth erupted beneath the wolves, throwing them off balance. Asher darted in, his crimson blades moving with precision as he dispatched 2 wolves with clean strikes. "Behind you!" Leora shouted, loosing an arrow that embedded itself in a wolf lunging at Asher's back. He gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement before focusing on the remaining threats. Though he was fully aware, but he didn't say anything, allowing them to score some points. After all, thanks to his upgraded Blood Supreme, he can see a lot of powerful figures hidden and watching over them. Kai used his illusions to confuse the wolves, making them snap at phantoms while the real team moved in for the kill. Within minutes, the pack was defeated, and the group emerged relatively unscathed. "Not bad," Freya said, wiping soot from her cheek. "Though you could have let me handle them all. My flames are pretty efficient, you know." Asher shot her a look. "This isn't about showing off. It's about efficiency and survival." "Touché," she replied with a grin. They continued deeper into the forest, encountering increasingly dangerous foes. In the third zone, they came across a towering creature, a golem of thorns, its body covered in razor-sharp vines that pulsed with a dark green light. The core shard embedded in its chest was clearly their target. "How do we handle this?" Caden asked, his fists clenched. Asher analyzed the creature. "It's slow but heavily armored. Leora, Aim for the joints with your arrows to restrict its movement. Kai, use illusions to distract it and keep it from targeting us directly. Freya, your flames can weaken its vines. Caden and I will go for the core.
Freya smirked.
Finally, something big enough to really burn. The plan unfolded with remarkable coordination. Leora's arrows found their marks, embedding in the golem's knee joints and slowing its movements. Kai conjured a mirage of another golem, drawing its attention away from the group. Freya's flames burned through its protective vines, exposing the core. Asher and Caden moved in, their combined strength overwhelming the weakened golem. With a final strike, Asher pierced the core, and the creature crumbled into ash, leaving behind a large shard glowing with radiant energy. The team collected the shard, their spirits high despite the mounting fatigue. As the trial neared its end, Reynolds' voice echoed through the forest, signaling the conclusion.
All teams, return to the starting point. Time is up.
The group made their way back, their collection of core shards safely stowed. At the clearing, the other teams were already assembling, some looking battered and others triumphant. Reynolds stood at the center, his expression neutral as he surveyed the students. Today's trial was about more than collecting shards. It was a test of strategy, adaptability, and teamwork. Some of you excelled. Others, not so much. He glanced at Asher's team, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Team Magnus performed exceptionally, showcasing coordination and resourcefulness.
Well done.
Inwardly, Asher rolled his eyes as he many times had to use the blood manipulation to redirect his party from harm and also to let them attack the beasts at right points. Freya nudged Asher with her elbow.
Look at you, golden boy.
Winning hearts and praise. Asher rolled his eyes but couldn't hide the faint smirk that tugged at his lips. The students were dismissed, their performances recorded for future evaluations. Asher returned to his dorm, his body weary but his mind sharp. The trial had been a success, but he knew the academy would only continue to challenge him further. Freya, as always, lingered outside his door.
Same time tomorrow, she teased.
Asher sighed, closing the door without answering. Behind the closed door, he allowed himself a small smile.
It isn't boring as I thought. He laid there as he thought.
But I guess time to check it out, Asher mumbled as he looked at his system screen. After obtaining the first rank in Academy, he got an cheat opportunity, and now he is going to use it. Do the gotcha, he said as System started to roll the gotcha. Congratulations, host, on obtaining a demi-plane cheat. Dark Existence Demi-Plane.
Dark Existence Demi-Plane. Type, Demi-Plane of Shadows. Rank.
Size, 100 million square kilometers.
Description.
The Dark Existence Demi-Plane is a shadowy realm shrouded in mystery and dark energy. This plane exists in a perpetual twilight, with rivers of obsidian and forests of blackened glowing flora. It's a place of intense power, suited for hosting dark rituals, cultivating forbidden resources, and nurturing shadow-based entities.
Key features.
Shadow Nexus, a powerful energy core located at the heart of the demiplane. It generates a limitless supply of shadow energy that can be harnessed by the host or entities within the realm. Nightshade Grove, a sprawling forest of bioluminescent trees and plants, useful for crafting unique items or enhancing shadow magic. Obsidian Forge, a volcanic region rich in rare materials like shadow steel and obsidian. It serves as a prime location for creating legendary weapons and armor. Void Gates, portals scattered across the realm that allow for instantaneous travel within the demiplane or to other connected realms. Special abilities. Dark Entity Cultivation. The plane can nurture shadow-based lifeforms, making it ideal for raising a personal army of creatures attuned to darkness. Shadow Weaving. Enhance all shadow-related abilities by 50% while in the demiplane or while using its resources. Infinite Expansion Potential. The demiplane can grow by absorbing other realms or resources, increasing in size and capability over time. Is it like my personal dimension? Asher asked, tilting his head curiously.
Yes, host.
It is your own personal dimension, the system responded. This dimension has been growing for billions of years, and countless ancient entities now inhabit it. Host should be ready to face them.
Asher frowned.
How is it a cheat if I can't even properly use it? He asked, his tone skeptical.
Do not worry, host.
The strongest existence tied to this plane is now your servant after your successful binding with it. The system paused before continuing. Would host like to bind with it? Asher nodded without hesitation. Suddenly, a sharp flash overwhelmed his vision, and his mind was whisked away into an unfamiliar expanse. He found himself standing beneath a vast, dark sky, filled with swirling crimson and black clouds. As the image zoomed in, Asher realized he was inside an enormous hall. Ahead of him was a beautiful black and red coffin, massive in size, exuding an aura of ancient power. He tried to move closer, but his body felt paralyzed. Just as he gathered his strength to approach, the image shifted again, and he found himself standing directly before the coffin. Ahead of him was a beautiful black and red coffin, massive in size, exuding an aura of ancient power. He tried to move closer, but his body felt paralyzed. Just as he gathered his strength to approach, the image shifted again, and he found himself standing directly before the coffin. It was intricate and imposing, with runes glowing faintly along its edges. Asher's eyes were drawn to its center, where a translucent image of a woman lay sleeping within. She was stunningly beautiful, her dark hair cascading around her, and her closed eyes held an eerie calmness. Without warning, her eyes snapped open. They were pitch black with glowing purple irises, staring directly at him. The sheer intensity of her gaze caused his heart to stop for a moment, and a cold sweat ran down his back. Before he could react further, the vision dissolved, and Asher found himself back in his dorm room, gasping for breath. "What just happened?" he murmured, still shaken by the experience. "The dark existence demiplane is now bound to you, host." The system's calm voice only added to the surreal nature of what he had just experienced. Was that woman the strongest existence there? Asher asked after claiming down. "Yes, host," the system replied as Asher nodded. "If I open it, I'll go there, right?" he asked. "Correct, host," the system confirmed. Asher then opened his watch, typing in a leave application for a few days, just in case he decided to spend time in the demiplane. Just as he was about to close the watch, he sighed and mumbled to himself, "I'm going to regret this." Without much thought, he typed out a message, "Come to my room." He sent it to Freya. Why am I even calling her? He wondered aloud, staring at the sent message.
He shrugged to himself.
It'll be good if I die there accidentally. At least no one will be around to nag me anymore, he muttered under his breath. Knock, knock. That fast, he mumbled, standing up to open the door. Hello, he began but stopped mid-sentence, stunned to see a stunning woman standing at his door. She had long silky violet hair neatly tied back in a ponytail with a crimson band. Her face was delicately oval-shaped, exuding an air of elegance, and a pair of violet-framed glasses rested atop her sharp, discerning eyes. Her gaze was intense yet measured, giving off an aura of authority and confidence. Her figure was strikingly curvaceous, with a well-proportioned hourglass shape that was hard to ignore. Her crimson academy coat fit snugly, accentuating her form while still maintaining professionalism. She carried herself with grace and poise, her movements deliberate and commanding. Asher quickly shook off his errant thoughts, mentally chastising himself and focusing on her face, determined not to appear distracted or inappropriate. Keep it together, he thought to himself, maintaining a composed expression as she continued speaking. "Mr. Asher Magnus, you submitted a leave application. May I ask why?" she said, her tone sharp and professional. "It's just a few days leave application. What's the big deal?" he replied, genuinely puzzled about why she'd come herself. "Yes, if it were anyone else, I, the student director, wouldn't have had to come. But aside from being rank 1, you are also a Magnus. Continue reading on Empire. The renowned troublemakers in our academy," she added pointedly, her expression unwavering. "So, tell me, what's the real reason behind this application?" Asher sighed inwardly. He knew lying wouldn't work, she'd catch on easily. "I really need some kind of emotion-blocking skill," he thought before responding. "I'm going on a dungeon dive," he said. Technically, a demiplane was like a dungeon, so it wasn't entirely a lie. The director studied him closely, then nodded. "Good. I suppose you find your classes too dull since you're clearly a step ahead of others." "I'll grant it," she said at last. "Thank you, Director." Yulia Garcia. "But I suppose you can call me Director Garcia," she replied. Asher nodded. "Thank you, Director Garcia." She turned and left, leaving Asher standing there, still a bit surprised by the sudden encounter. "Who was that?" Freya's voice broke the silence, causing Asher to glance back at her. "She's our director," Asher replied while still keeping his gaze on the director. Freya looked at him, then toward where the director had left. Her mouth curled into a teasing smirk. "That's your type, huh? MILFs?" she asked with a sly grin. Asher nearly choked on his breath. What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice laced with indignation. Freya leaned closer, clearly enjoying his flustered reaction. "I saw the way you were staring. Don't try to deny it, saying, I was just seeing how strong she is." "I wasn't staring like that," he retorted quickly, though his reddened ears betrayed his composure. Her teasing showed no signs of stopping. Freya smirked again, placing a hand on her hip. Guess I need to grow bigger if I want to attract your attention. Asher glanced at her, exasperation evident on his face. Even if you grow bigger, I don't think you'd stop acting like a brat, he said flatly. Freya's face turned red, and she glared at him. You bastard! She snapped, but her anger was short-lived as he waved her off. Enough. Now help me with this, Asher said, holding out his watch. Type in a leave application for yourself. Freya huffed but complied, typing in the request. What dungeon is this for anyway? She asked while tapping away on her device. My personal dungeon, Asher replied, his tone casual as if it was no big deal. Freya's eyes widened slightly in surprise before she nodded. Coming from supreme families, the concept of owning personal dungeons wasn't unheard of, though it was still a rarity. Must be some crazy island your family granted you to train in, huh? She teased. Asher remained silent, not offering her any further explanation. Ding. Both their watches lit up with a notification. Freya glanced at it and then back at Asher. Our leave applications were approved, she announced with a smirk, tossing his watch back to him. Looks like I'm tagging along. That's why I called you here, Asher replied. Asher gestured ahead as a swirling portal of dark gray energy expanded, growing larger and stabilizing into an imposing gateway. The edges of the portal shimmered ominously, exuding a sense of power that made Freya raise an eyebrow in curiosity. Without hesitation, Asher stepped through, with Freya following close behind. They found themselves inside a massive hall, its vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe under the faint, flickering light of black flames. Freya glanced around, her gaze captivated by the crimson carpet that stretched across the floor, flanked by dark stone pillars. Whoa, don't tell me this is actually a castle. Is this the dungeon itself? She asked, her voice tinged with awe. What's the theme here? Undead? Dark mages? She added, shooting Asher a questioning look. Asher opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, both of them froze, their bodies locking in place as an overwhelming pressure washed over them. Neither could move a muscle. The fuck? Freya stammered, struggling against the unseen force pressing down on her. This pressure, it's like gravity times 10. Asher clenched his jaw, his mind racing. It's the rules of this place, he said through gritted teeth, feeling the oppressive weight increase with every passing second. Freya's gaze darted toward the far end of the hall, her breath catching as she noticed a figure slowly rising from a massive, ornate throne. Asher, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, what is that? The figure stepped forward, the pressure in the room intensifying as they moved. The air felt suffocating, as if the very space around them was bending under the presence of this being. It's the ruler of this realm, Asher said, his voice steady despite the tension. Stay close. And don't do anything reckless. Freya nodded, her usual cockiness replaced by a rare seriousness as she prepared herself for what was to come. As the figure approached, they saw it was a woman, strikingly beautiful, with cascading raven-black hair and eyes that burned like molten rubies. Her form was wrapped in a sleek, black dress with a daring high slit that accentuated her elegance and lent her an aura of sultry confidence. The dim light of the hall seemed to caress her every movement, making her appear almost otherworldly. You better not let your perviness show here, Freya muttered, elbowing Asher in the ribs. Her tone was laced with suspicion, clearly teasing him about his earlier encounter with Director Garcia. Asher resisted the urge to roll his eyes, letting out a slow breath. For the last time, Freya, I'm not what you think I am, he said, his voice even but with a hint of exasperation. Freya gave him a side-eye smirk. Sure you're not, MILF magnet. She snickered, but the tension in her body betrayed that she, too, was unsettled by the approaching woman. The woman stopped a few meters away, her ruby eyes scanning them with an intensity that seemed to pierce through their very souls. She smiled, a smile that was equal parts alluring and chilling. Welcome, Asher Magnus, she said, her voice smooth and commanding yet soft enough to send a shiver down his spine. I see you've brought company. Asher gave a polite nod, keeping his gaze steady. She's my partner, he replied cautiously, unsure of how to address the situation. Freya scoffed at the word but didn't interrupt, keeping her eyes locked on the enigmatic woman. The woman's smile deepened as her gaze lingered on Freya, who stiffened under the scrutiny. Interesting. You've chosen well, she said cryptically before returning her focus to Asher. Shall we begin? Begin what, exactly? Asher asked, unsure of her intentions. Chuckle. The woman chuckled, a melodic sound with a hint of menace, and looked directly at Asher. You are the master of this plane. What else but exploring it? She said with a smirk. Asher nodded slowly, realizing the truth in her words. By the way, My name is Catherine Bloodcrown, she said with a slight bow, her gaze unwavering. I am the strongest existence within this demiplane. Asher blinked, recognition dawning on his face. I saw you when I was bonding with this plane. Yes, Catherine replied with a faint smile. You saw a fragment of my presence during the bonding process. I was wondering when you'd decide to visit this realm, she added, her tone tinged with amusement. Asher nodded again, his expression contemplative. I guess it's time to see what this place holds, he said. Freya stood quietly beside him, her gaze darting between the two as she tried to gauge the situation. So, you are the realm spirit? Freya asked, her tone curious. In many dungeons or realms, it was common for them to birth a will, often called a realm spirit. No, I am not that, Catherine replied smoothly. She raised her finger, and with a flick, a small figure materialized, a little girl dressed in a black Gothic gown, her eyes wide with a mischievous glint. She is, Catherine continued, gesturing toward the girl. Why do you call me? The little girl asked indignantly, crossing her arms as her gaze turned toward Asher. He looked back at her, intrigued. She's the spirit of this place, he clarified, his tone calm. Hearing his words, the little girl's eyes lit up, and she suddenly darted toward him. Master, she exclaimed in a high-pitched voice as she clung to his arm. Yes, she is, Catherine said with a small nod, amusement flickering in her ruby eyes as the girl continued to cling to Asher. All right, give me some space, Asher muttered, gently trying to push the girl back. Freya watched the scene with her arms crossed, a smirk tugging at her lips. You've certainly made some unique friends here, she remarked dryly. Catherine, still watching with that enigmatic smile, added, she may look small, but do not underestimate her. She's as much a part of this realm's power as I am. Asher nodded, already sensing that the little girl was stronger than Catherine. The only issue was clear: neither of them could leave this plane. That much he had gathered about this peculiar place. So, what do you want to see first? Catherine asked, her tone calm and inviting. Somewhere I can learn more blood-related techniques, Asher replied plainly. Immediately, the others in the room groaned or rolled their eyes. Of course you'd pick that, Freya muttered with a sigh, while the little girl pouted and chimed in, that's boring. You should come with me. There are lots of interesting things to explore here. Enjoy more content from Empire. Asher shot them both a flat look. I'm not here to play, he said, his voice measured but firm. Freya raised an eyebrow and gave him a mockingly serious salute. Yes, as expected of Mr. Workaholic. So, what's this serious place you want us to see? She teased. The little girl nodded, clapping her hands. Fine, follow me then. But don't blame me if it gets too intense, she said with a mischievous grin. She began leading them down a hallway that shimmered with an eerie, shifting light. Freya casually grabbed Asher's arm and dragged him along, ignoring his bemused expression. Come on, stop brooding and just follow her. Who knows, maybe you'll find something fun for a change, she said with a smirk. Asher sighed but let himself be pulled along, trailing after the little girl as she hummed a cheerful tune. The dark Gothic atmosphere of the plain surrounded them, and the air seemed to grow heavier with each step, as if the very essence of the realm was alive and watching them. Catherine, on the other hand, chuckled softly as she observed the playful bickering between Asher and Freya. Her ruby eyes sparkled with amusement as she trailed behind them. Finally, I can leave this suffocating hole, she murmured under her breath, her voice laced with satisfaction. For centuries, she had been bound to this plane, waiting for someone strong enough to bond with it. Now, with Asher as its master, her chains were effectively loosened, granting her the freedom she had long desired. She followed after the group, her elegant strides betraying a hint of anticipation. This was her chance to see the outside world once more, and she was determined to make the most of it. Catherine's history was as tragic as it was steeped in power. Once a free and mighty being, she had been bound to this castle by the previous master, a tyrant drunk on his strength. He had underestimated her cunning and wrath, and when he dared to overstep his bounds, Catherine killed him with her own hands. But in doing so, she triggered the curse he had placed as a failsafe, sealing her within the castle's confines. For over 15,000 years, she endured this imprisonment. In the first millennium, she desperately searched for a way out, but the curse proved unbreakable. Resigned to her fate, she entered a deep slumber in her coffin, her power lying dormant as the castle awaited a new master who could reclaim the realm and free her. Now, Asher was here, a new master, and perhaps her only hope of regaining freedom. He was different from the last one. Though young, he exuded a composed strength, and most importantly, he seemed free of the arrogance or lust for power that had doomed her previous master. Catherine found herself cautiously optimistic but remained skeptical. After all, humans were often predictable in their flaws. Her vampiric beauty, which could bend the will of even the strongest of beings, had no effect on him. Freya, who tried to resist her allure, showed signs of being drawn in, her gaze occasionally betraying a hint of awe. Yet Asher remained untouched. This immunity wasn't due to discipline alone but stemmed from his supreme blood ability, a gift that made him immune to all harmful effects, whether they be poisons, illusions, or even charms. Catherine couldn't help but be intrigued by this unique trait. It meant she couldn't manipulate him, but it also meant he wasn't a slave to primal desires like so many others had been. As they stepped out of the castle, Catherine paused at the threshold. Her expression remained neutral, but the boundary line shimmered faintly, a stark reminder of her invisible prison. The little girl beside her, grinning mischievously as usual, commented, "Oops, I forgot. She's sealed here." Freya glanced back, raising an eyebrow.
Sealed?
"Why's that?" The little realm spirit shrugged. "I don't know all the details. It was before my wisdom was awakened fully." Asher turned toward Catherine, his brow furrowed. "What happened exactly?" Her crimson gaze met his evenly. "The master before you, he was arrogant and thought his power gave him the right to take what he wanted. He tried to force himself on me. I killed him, but he cursed me in his final moments, binding me to this place." Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet fury in her tone as she recounted the events. Asher's fists clenched at her words. "That really happened?" he asked, his voice low and measured. He can't just believe her words. Catherine's lips curved into a faint, almost challenging smile. "You have a blood-related ability, don't you? Why not check the truth for yourself?" Her words carried a subtle edge as if testing his resolve. Freya folded her arms, looking between the two. "Blood-related ability?" "She saw your family lineage ability." "I wonder if she saw mine," she mumbled to herself. Ignoring Freya's question, Asher stepped closer to Catherine. "How would I do that?" "You need only focus on my bloodline's core," Catherine explained, tilting her head slightly. "A being with your power can glimpse fragments of a person's essence through their blood, if you are willing to connect for a moment." Asher hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding.
All right. I'll try.
Catherine extended her hand, palm up, offering it to him. Her confidence was unshaken, and her gaze locked on his. "Then let's see if you're as capable as you seem, master." Asher grasped Catherine's wrist, his grip firm yet hesitant, as her ruby-red eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Go ahead," she murmured, her voice both encouraging and commanding. He closed his eyes, focusing inward as he reached out with his blood-related ability. The moment their connection began, he felt a surge unlike anything he had ever experienced. Her blood was dense, ancient, and unfathomably powerful. Merely sensing its presence was like trying to move a mountain. Massive, immovable, and overwhelming. Catherine noticed his furrowed brows and the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Don't try to control it," she instructed gently. "You're not meant to dominate it. Connect with it.
Feel it. Embrace it.
Become one with it." Taking a steadying breath, Asher pushed aside his instinct to wrestle with the blood's immense energy. Instead, he let himself immerse in it, like a drop of water merging into a vast ocean. That's when he noticed the strange, paradoxical nature of her essence. Her blood felt both alive and dead, vibrating with vitality and yet eerily stagnant at the same time. The realization struck him: Catherine wasn't entirely human. Her blood bore traces of the undead, a race tied to death yet not fully consumed by it. But it wasn't like any undead he had read about. There was something unique, something far more profound. He couldn't yet pinpoint what kind of being she was, but one thing was clear: her blood wasn't ordinary. As the connection deepened, images began to flicker in his mind. He caught glimpses of a younger Catherine, her radiant beauty unchanged, standing over a man whose face was twisted in terror. The air crackled with magic as her victim cursed her in his dying breath, binding her to the castle. He could feel her fury, her pain, and her defiance as she stood tall, refusing to break even in the face of imprisonment. Catherine's voice brought him back. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" she said softly, a trace of sadness in her tone. "The weight I carry is not something most can fathom." Asher opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. He didn't release her wrist immediately. "Your blood, it's beyond anything I've ever felt. It's like it's alive but not, and it's tied to something ancient, something vast." She smiled faintly, her expression unreadable. "You've only scratched the surface, master. But you've done well. You didn't crumble under the pressure." Freya, who had been silently observing, frowned and crossed her arms. "What did you see?" she asked, her tone cautious. Asher released Catherine's wrist and straightened up. I saw enough to understand why she's sealed here. She wasn't lying about the curse. Freya narrowed her eyes. And the rest? He glanced at Catherine, who gave him a slight nod of approval. The rest, Asher said, his tone firm, isn't something I can explain easily. But she's not an enemy. Continue reading at Empire. Catherine chuckled softly. Wise words. Now, shall we continue exploring? Or do you have more questions for me, Master? Asher looked at her thoughtfully before asking, Can I show Freya what I saw? Catherine tilted her head, a hint of curiosity in her expression. Why are you even asking? She questioned, her ruby eyes narrowing slightly. It's your memory, Asher replied simply. I don't know if you'd like it to be shared or not. Catherine's expression softened, and she shook her head with a faint smile. There's nothing I am ashamed of in what you saw, especially since the one involved is long dead. But... Her smile widened, becoming a touch more genuine. It's rare to meet someone who would ask for permission first instead of assuming they have the right. You're different, Master. Asher nodded at her response, then asked once more, So, I can show her? Yes, Catherine confirmed with a slight nod. You may share it. But be warned, while you experienced it in an instant, it will take time for her. Memories like these can be overwhelming for those unprepared. She gestured with a flick of her wrist, and 3 plush chairs appeared in the grand hall. Sit, she commanded. Unlike you who saw it directly through the bond, she'll need to experience it as it unfolds. It might take some time, so be patient. Freya hesitated, her brows furrowing in confusion. Why are you even showing me her memories? She asked, glancing between Asher and Catherine. Asher sighed, crossing his arms. Because I can tell you don't fully trust her, Freya. I don't blame you, her story is unusual. But I also know you won't take my word for it. Seeing her truth for yourself might help. Freya's gaze shifted to Catherine, who stood silently, her demeanor calm yet regal. You trust her enough to show me this? Freya asked, her voice carrying a hint of suspicion. I trust what I saw, Asher replied firmly. And I trust you to understand what she's been through once you see it. Freya hesitated but eventually sat down in one of the chairs. Fine. Show me. Catherine's eyes glimmered faintly as she stepped closer, speaking in a quiet, commanding tone. Remember this, girl, what you are about to see isn't a justification, nor is it an apology. It is simply the truth. Take it or leave it. Freya nodded, bracing herself. I'm ready. Asher stepped forward, placing a hand on Freya's forehead. He closed his eyes, allowing the bond he had formed with Catherine's memories to flow into Freya's mind. Slowly, the room around them faded, and Freya found herself immersed in Catherine's past, a haunting story of her. The demiplane was once a thriving world known as the Dark Existence World, a realm shrouded in eternal night. The absence of sunlight had shaped it into a haven for nocturnal creatures. Vampires, witches, werewolves, and various other beings of the night roamed freely. And the vampire clan were the true ruler of this world, but among them, one vampire species reigned supreme among other vampire clan, the Bloodcrown clan. This clan was renowned for their unique and terrifying ability, Bloodcrown. With this power, they could create blood warriors, undead entities composed entirely of blood. These warriors were impervious to physical attacks, and even magical assaults were only 20% effective against them. Their sole weakness was holy magic, a rarity in a world where darkness dominated. Though very powerful, they were a peaceful clan that never wished to dominate, and always remained from where they began. The Blood Continent. Blood Jewel Kingdom. Within the kingdom, one of the 4 High Duke families, the most powerful families beneath the royal lineage, held dominion, the Bloodcrown High Duke household. This family's influence stretched across the land, rivaling even the royal family in power. The Blood Jewel Kingdom was alive with festivity. In the sprawling halls of the Bloodcrown estate, a magnificent ball was underway. Nobles from various vampire lineages, each with pale skin, ruby-like eyes, and pointed ears, danced elegantly to hauntingly beautiful music. Their chatter filled the air as they mingled and drank from ornate goblets filled with crimson liquid. Suddenly, the sound of a bell echoed through the grand hall, silencing the crowd. Ring. A regal figure stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. This was Alaric Bloodcrown, the High Duke of the Bloodcrown household. His crimson eyes scanned the room as he raised a glass high, his voice resonating across the chamber. Esteemed guests, he began, his tone smooth yet authoritative. Today, we gather to celebrate a momentous occasion, the 18th birthday of my youngest and most radiant child. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the crowd before continuing. Please welcome my daughter, Lady Catherine Bloodcrown. As the final word left his lips, the lights in the hall dimmed, save for a spotlight that illuminated the grand staircase. The room fell into a hushed awe as a figure emerged at the top of the stairs. Catherine descended with regal grace. Her flowing black hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her piercing ruby eyes gleamed like twin jewels. She wore a striking crimson gown, adorned with intricate patterns that shimmered in the dim light, and a matching cape trailed behind her. In her delicate hand, she held a goblet, the dark liquid within reflecting the dim glow of the hall. As she reached the base of the staircase, the crowd erupted in a unified chant. All hail Lady Catherine Bloodcrown. The nobles and esteemed guests bowed low, their reverence palpable. Even the 3 other high dukes, whose power rivaled that of her father, inclined their heads slightly, an acknowledgement of her status. Catherine scanned the crowd, her expression calm yet commanding, exuding an air of dignity and control. This was her night, a celebration of her coming into her own as a member of the Bloodcrown lineage. Catherine smiled, a dazzling expression that seemed to illuminate the dimly lit hall. Her beauty was utterly captivating, leaving many of the younger nobles staring at her with wide eyes and slackened jaws. Whispers rippled through the crowd, admiration and awe evident in their voices. Catherine smiled, a dazzling expression that seemed to illuminate the dimly lit hall. Her beauty was utterly captivating, leaving many of the younger nobles staring at her with wide eyes and slackened jaws. Whispers rippled through the crowd, admiration and awe evident in their voices. Amid the sea of stunned faces, one pair of eyes burned with something far more intense. The crown prince of the Blood Jewel Kingdom, a tall and commanding figure with striking features and an air of entitlement, fixated on Catherine. His ruby-red eyes blazed with determination as he watched her descend the stairs with effortless grace. She is perfection incarnate, he murmured to himself, his voice low but resolute. His hand clenched around the ornate goblet he held, the crimson liquid within rippling with his subtle show of strength. She will be mine, he declared under his breath, his tone filled with unwavering confidence. Such a woman can only belong to me, the next king of the Blood Jewel Kingdom. Unaware of the prince's silent vow, Catherine continued her descent, her smile unwavering, her gaze sharp and composed. While others fawned over her beauty, she paid no heed to the stares or whispers. Years of noble upbringing had taught her to maintain her poise, even as the weight of countless eyes bore down on her. But in the back of her mind, she could feel the predatory gaze of the crown prince. It wasn't the first time she had drawn such attention, nor would it be the last. Yet something about the intensity of his stare sent a faint chill down her spine, a silent warning she chose to ignore for now. The night was hers, and no one, not even the crown prince, could overshadow her moment. Catherine reached the stage, her father helping her climb the last few steps. The moment she stood tall, a soft but commanding voice echoed across the hall. Now, I am going to leave this stage to the star of the night, he said, climbing down and stepping aside to let her take the spotlight. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted into applause, their eyes never leaving her as she smiled gracefully, taking in the admiration. Thank you all for coming to my coming-of-age celebration, Catherine said with a confident yet warm voice, and the room filled with cheers and claps in response. We've created a grand feast tonight, let's enjoy it, she added, raising her goblet, prompting another round of cheers from the crowd. As Catherine turned to make her way through the nobles, her path was blocked by a figure. It was the crown prince, his eyes glinting with determination. Ms. Bloodcrown, I have a question, he said, stepping forward. Of course, Catherine replied with a polite yet intrigued smile, her posture poised as always. Are you engaged? The crown prince asked bluntly, his voice steady but filled with an unmistakable intensity. Catherine's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she regained her composure. The question, while bold, was not unexpected. She knew the crown prince's reputation and his apparent interest in her. No, I am not, Catherine replied smoothly, though the crowd's whispers grew louder at her words. And I do not intend to be, at least not for many centuries to come.
The crown prince, however, was undeterred.
His confidence only seemed to grow.
Are you sure? You can change your mind.
If you accept, I'll offer you the honor of being my first wife. After all, who could resist such an offer? He spoke with such conviction that it was clear he expected her to accept. Catherine raised an eyebrow, her smile remaining composed but tinged with a subtle challenge. Your offer is noted, but it means little to me, she replied, her voice calm and firm. I will choose my own path, not one dictated by anyone else. The crown prince's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. It was clear that Catherine would not be easily swayed, and he would need to find another way to earn her favor. Still, the seeds of a rivalry were planted that night, one that would grow as the years passed. You do know I am the crown prince, the next king to be, he said, his tone laced with arrogance. And you will be honored by being seated as the first queen among my many queens, he added confidently, blocking her path once again as Catherine tried to step away. Catherine stopped in her tracks, her ruby eyes narrowing as she turned to face him fully. Never, she said coldly, her voice sharp as ice. The crown prince's expression faltered for the first time. Her rejection, so blunt and unyielding, sent a ripple of shock through the room. But his shock quickly gave way to anger, his face darkening. Suddenly, he grabbed her wrist with a force that made the crowd gasp. Be humbled, wench, he spat, his voice venomous as his grip tightened. Catherine's face remained calm, though her eyes burned with a fiery intensity. She didn't flinch or cower under his touch, which only enraged him further. The crown prince was a man who had been raised with a diamond spoon in his mouth.
Whatever he wanted, he got.
Wealth, power, and reverence had been handed to him on a silver platter. His immense talent and unmatched strength ensured that no one dared defy him. Yet here was Catherine Bloodcrown, standing unmoved by his position or threats, and it was something he could not comprehend. The hall fell silent, the tension thick as everyone watched the scene unfold. The other nobles whispered amongst themselves, but no one dared to intervene. You overstep your boundaries, your highness, Catherine said icily, her voice low but cutting through the silence like a blade. She didn't try to wrest her wrist free but instead stood tall, exuding a regal authority that rivaled his. Release her now, came a commanding voice from the crowd. It was Alaric Bloodcrown, her father, stepping forward with a deadly calm. His eyes, crimson and fierce, locked onto the crown prince. I would advise you not to disrespect my daughter, or my family. The crown prince hesitated, his pride warring with his sense of self-preservation. Reluctantly, he released Catherine's wrist, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. His crimson eyes blazed with indignation as he turned his ire toward Alaric Bloodcrown. Who do you think you are to speak to me like that? The crown prince demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at the High Duke. His voice carried the weight of his ego, but the room's atmosphere shifted as everyone present exchanged uneasy glances. The tension was palpable. It wasn't entirely the crown prince's fault. After 100,000 years of unchallenged rule, the Blood Jewel Kingdom's monarchy had grown complacent and arrogant. The current generation of rulers had forgotten the true power of the noble clans, particularly the Bloodcrown family. This ignorance had been passed down to the crown prince, whose bloated ego now matched that of his father, the king. Alaric didn't respond immediately, his expression calm but unreadable. He turned to one of his attendants, who stepped forward wordlessly and presented a sheathed blade. With a deliberate and practiced motion, Alaric unsheathed it, the crimson steel glinting menacingly in the dim light of the ballroom. The room fell into silence as Alaric stepped forward, his towering presence casting a shadow over the crown prince. Without a word, Alaric thrust the blade into the marble floor, the impact resounding like a judge's gavel. This blade is a reminder of your position, Alaric said evenly, his tone devoid of emotion yet carrying an undeniable authority. You are not above the laws of our world, nor the respect owed to its pillars of power. The crown prince stiffened, his pride refusing to let him back down completely. But even he could not deny the unspoken warning in Alaric's words. Take this insolence back to the king, Alaric continued, his voice rising slightly. Perhaps he will remember what the Bloodcrown family represents. The crowd collectively gasped as the Bloodcrown knight stepped forward, retrieving the crimson blade from the floor with a solemn bow. His every movement radiated purpose, his gaze unwavering as he turned toward the crown prince. The hall seemed to hold its breath, knowing the significance of this act. The returning of the blade was not a mere gesture of submission or reconciliation. It was the Bloodcrown family's way of declaring their intent. They no longer recognized the current king's authority. By returning the ceremonial weapon, they had symbolically relinquished their role as High Dukes, a station granted by the royal family, and signaled their intent to challenge the monarchy for the throne itself. The room buzzed with suppressed whispers, the implications of this declaration reverberating through the assembly. It was a direct challenge to the crown prince, the king, and the entire royal lineage. The crown prince, realizing the gravity of what had just occurred, paled. His earlier arrogance now seemed foolish in the face of such a bold and deliberate act of defiance. You dare? He began, his voice trembling with fury and disbelief.